Al Eufrasio. Welcome to Tech Talk with Daniel.
Well, thank you. Appreciate you having me.
You know, as a LucasArts fan, I've waited for years for Sierra to come around and stop with the dead ends and the constant deaths in their games, which is why my list of favorite Sierra games consists of games like King's Quest VII and Space Quest VI and Leisure Suit Larry 7. And since you've contributed to all three, it's truly an honor to have you as my guest today.
Well, I'm flattered. Thank you.
But before we discuss these projects, let's start at the beginning. How did you get into art?
How did I get into art? Well, you have the old stereotype whenever you ask an artist, how did you get into art? Everybody says, well, I've been drawing since I could hold a pencil when I was a little kid. Mm-hmm. And that's true of me. Pretty much. I for some reason have in some cases anyway, I have like incredible recall. So I actually remember being about 2 years old and sitting at my parents' kitchen table and drawing on scrap paper bags and things like that. And it kind of became an obsession early on, and I just stuck with it over the years.
What did you draw back then?
Enjoyed I mostly copied or tried to copy cartoons I'd see on TV or comic strips from the newspaper, things like that. It's typically how people start, is just, copying what they see or random objects around the house.
And did your parents want you to pursue this as a career option, or did they consider it a hobby back then?
They kind of supported me. My parents were from Portugal, and in their time, it was quite a poor country. So all everyone really knew was farming and fishing. The fact that they moved to America and, had their kids here shows that they were aware that there is a wider world out there with more possibilities. So they didn't warn me about the hazards of becoming an artist because they didn't know to warn me. They just figured, hey, if if people are making money off of this, then there has to be something to it.
And so what was your first paid job as an artist?
Oh, God, the first paid job would have to have been, I was in art school, and somebody had a budget to come up with a little animated commercial for a county fair, and then my entire class contributed to it, which was, it was interesting. It was, in hindsight, looking back now with I guess my and everyone else, I'm sure, who was involved with our current sense of standards, is a pretty sad affair, but we were
so
kind of proud of it at the time.
Everyone in the class contributed to that commercial, like each person got one part, or did you split into groups? How did you work on that commercial?
I think we pretty much all devised it as a group, storyboarded it, and then just made sure there were enough scenes to hand out for one person to animate, a segment. And then anything else that was left over, we just kind of collaborated on in different ways.
What product was it for?
It was a county fair.
Oh.
Yeah. So it was a very local sort of thing. Nothing that would have become any kind of classic, well-known commercial or anything like that.
Is it available online?
I very much doubt it. I don't even know if I have a copy.
They could have at least given you a copy of the tape to keep all these years.
I'm sure they did. It's just a matter of whether I still have it.
So how did you get from this to working at Sierra Online?
Well, so this art school that I mentioned, it happens to be the Kubert School in New Jersey. And I did my 3 years there. It's a 3-year program. Got my certificate in animation / commercial art because they work commercial art into everything over there. In case you're not able to immediately get into your area of focus, your area of study. I freelanced around New York City a little bit on a couple of projects. And then actually the following year, I was ready to go back to school because work seemed to have dried up. I wasn't finding anything. I was back to working in supermarkets, I think I was working in at the time. The thing with Sierra was that they had hired a bunch of people from the school a couple years before. And a lot of those people were still there. The vast majority of them that they hired out of the school were still there. People like Mark Hudgens, Karen Nestor. Brian Ellis was around, but I think he'd resigned by then or been laid off or something. I met him. He worked at another local startup named Tachyon. But there might have been a couple others. And then Sierra was basically building up their staff again for King's Quest VII and other stuff that was coming up. And they contacted the school, and I got word of that. And I interviewed, and 2 weeks later I was there, which was kind of a big deal because, from 1 week to 2 weeks later, traveling 3,000 miles, moving as much of my stuff as I can and leaving the rest for later. It was kind of whiplash, kind of like, whoa, yeah, how did that happen? But here I am, and now I've got to make good.
And what was the interview process at Sierra like?
My interview process was pretty funny because I'd always been taught, hey, you go on a job interview, you dress nice. You wear a suit, you dress to impress. I go there. I come to find out, I go there, I wear my suit. I'm talking to people. Everyone's dressed casually, It's like casual Friday all week long. And found out later on that people were actually laughing at me for wearing a suit. Said, hey, okay, hey, I'm only trying to dress respectably for you guys. If you don't want that, I'll disrespect you from now on.
I keep on hearing similar stories from the people I interview because we've been taught to dress up for corporate jobs, but it doesn't work the same way with computer game companies, apparently.
Yeah, not really in any kind of creative environment, really. You actually run the risk of seeming overly formal and stuffy and, quote unquote, not right for the group.
And were you already a Sierra fan by that point in time?
That's the funny thing. I never had a PC. I mostly grew up on Commodore computers, and Sierra barely had anything out for Commodore outside of a few arcade games from the early 80s. And, I had a few fully legal copies of those, I swear. And so I recognized their name from that and from seeing it in magazines for their adventure games, but I'd only ever seen the adventure games themselves in passing. It was funny. A cousin of mine, shortly before I say shortly, I'm thinking maybe it was a year or two before I applied and got hired, got a PC that came with King's Quest VI, which was their first, I believe it was their first game on CD-ROM. I could be wrong about that, but it was at least one of the first multimedia games.
One of the first. It wasn't the first, yeah.
Yeah, and CD-ROM was brand spanking new back then, and it was amazing, seeing this game where you have these cool graphics, like super detailed for the time, and playing actual audio samples and engaging you in the story and being so immersive. I mean, it definitely struck me as something that I would not mind at all getting involved in, you know? So when the job opportunity came up, I realized right away, multimedia, as it was known at the time, is not a bad industry to get into, especially for this company, based on what I've seen of their products.
You've said you had a Commodore computer. Did you play any LucasArts games? Because they had a bunch of Commodore titles.
I think I got as far as playing Maniac Mansion, and that was about it. I might have played Zack McCracken at some point, but if so, I don't remember.
So what was your first day at Sierra like?
Filling out a lot of paperwork. And not really. I actually feel like my first week at Sierra, I learned more about computers that week than I did in 3 years of art school, for sure. I mean, I kind of, day one, I'm sure I started learning Deluxe Paint, which I don't remember ever having too many difficulties with it. My recollection is that I kind of fell into the whole thing like very naturally, and didn't have too much trouble picking up on the software or getting an understanding of their pipeline and process for getting graphics into the game.
And what was your first project at Sierra?
Okay, so when I interviewed, here's the thing. People don't know that they might find very interesting. When I interviewed, it was supposed to be for a Leisure Suit Larry platform game. And again, Leisure Suit Larry, I had seen the boxes in stores. I, had like a passing familiarity with it. Didn't know how, didn't know the level of raunchiness or whatever. I knew the reputation, but I wasn't sure of like the actual level of adult content that the games had. It turns out they're about as innocent as the old Benny Hill show. But yeah, I interviewed. They were getting ready to do a Leisure Suit Larry platform game. They had a kind of a real funny storyline worked out where there's some mad scientist it was kind of a James Bond parody. So there's a mad scientist hiding out in a jungle in his estate or whatever, and he invents a babe magnet where all the attractive women of the world start converging on the jungle and the Amazon or whatever, and he's going to hold them for ransom. And somehow Larry stumbles into being responsible for rescuing them. When I got hired, when I started, the project had changed to something completely different. It was still kind of a platform game, but it was called Capital Punishment, and it was based on political satire. Something happened in the meantime. To this day, I don't know what. I haven't been able to find out, but the plan was changed. And this other backup idea kind of took over that team for whatever reason. So that was my first project, Capital Punishment. Ended up getting canceled a few months later, which was a little worrisome to me, being the new hire and all. But it fortunately ended right when they were needing more bodies working on King's Quest VII, actually. Because it was, what was it? It was like end of August, beginning of September. And they were trying to have it finished and in stores by mid-November, which didn't happen as far as I remember.
It did happen. It was released in November 24th.
Oh, okay. Okay.
But before we get to King's Quest VII...
Okay, I actually have a question for you.
No problem.
about
I
King's
want
Quest
to
VII.
talk about the Leisure Suit Larry platformer. Now,
Okay.
I have what seems to look like concept art from the game.
Okay, that looks very familiar.
Now, I see that this is concept art that apparently was retrieved from a dumpster, because that was Sierra's archiving process. Throw everything in the dumpster. But back when you saw the project for the first time, did it have any graphics created for it? Any backgrounds? Any gameplay or functionality that you could review? Or was it just a concept at the time?
There was a test level of a jungle.
A playable one?
If I'm remembering correctly, you could at least move left and right and watch the parallax scrolling, because that was the big technological milestone, is that one of our programmers got parallax scrolling working on a PC with a certain setup, and it was very impressive at the time. And then that jungle, if I'm remembering correctly, was used at least partially for capital punishment. It was, that work didn't get thrown away right away anyway. But it was used as kind of a swamp bayou sort of level in the game that replaced the Larry platform game. Yeah, oh, that's nice. A lot of that stuff, I think, was drawn by Mark Hudgens.
Mm-hmm. This one was drawn by Mark Hudgens, but this one wasn't.
Yeah, I believe he masterminded that whole game concept.
It's a shame it didn't see the light of day, because
I agree.
I don't want it to replace an actual point-and-click Leisure Suit Larry adventure game. But, in between games, you can release a platform or a pinball machine or whatever to keep the name Leisure Suit Larry alive, at least in between games. So, moving on to King's Quest VII, The Princeless Bride, you had a question for me.
Yeah, I'm like the rest of these old Sierra guys who can't seem to remember things, especially Steve Conrad. But I recall something about putting vouchers in game boxes, or
patches.
How would it go? So basically, at one point, they were preparing in case King's Quest VII didn't ship on time. They were considering putting vouchers in game boxes and selling the game boxes in the store, so that, you can still wrap a box and give it to someone for Christmas. And when they open it, there'd be a coupon. Hey, you get a copy of King's Quest VII, plus you get 10% off when it comes out, or something to that effect. I never found out if that was something they were planning or considering, or if it was something they actually did. And I was going to ask you if you had any idea about that.
It was something they considered. The whole release of King's Quest VII was a mess. Unfortunately, I had to suffer due to that mess, because, in the US, King's Quest VII had several releases. It had the initial release, which made it to the Christmas 94 deadline and was released in late November 1994. And that was version 1. And they eventually figured out the fact that the game, you can't complete the game. There's a game-breaking bug in Chapter 3. And there were others in other chapters. And so they started releasing patches. And so at first, they had the big boxes, the original big boxes, in which they added the floppy disk with a patch inside. And that was also released. So some of the people who bought it after Christmas 1994, like I think early 1995, had a floppy disk inside that they had to install to fix the bugs. And a year later, they released version 2.0, in which the game had an entirely different cover art, and they just fixed all the bugs and pre-released the game. And so, unfortunately, due to the fact that the game wasn't translated to Hebrew over here, but it got a localized box. So the localized box, usually when you localize a game, then the developer sends the first version as soon as possible so that they'll be able to release it at the same time worldwide. And so the version we got over here was the first version with a game-breaking bug, and we never got any of the fixed versions until I called the hint line, and they told me that they have to send me a patch. And it took, 3 months, and it got here, and I installed the patch. And at that point in time, I already finished the game, because you could skip through chapters inside the game. You could start the game from whatever chapter you wanted. So I encountered the game breaking bug in chapter 3. So I just started a new game from chapter 4. So I think I never finished chapter 3, because by the time I got the patch, I finished the game already. The end.
Well, thinking back, that was kind of one of the things that threw me and a lot of the other newer hires is the concept of patching. We didn't. I hung out mostly with artists, so we didn't understand fully anyway the nature of programming, and we'd hear about, the the game was tested, whatever game was tested, but it was shipped, and it was later discovered that it had all these bugs, and so we're distributing patches, and we were kind of appalled, and talking it out with people. We're like, what is that? Why are they releasing games that are technically not finished and then going through the expense and effort of finishing them later on after they've been out already? It kind of didn't make sense to us at the time, but, we weren't considering things like, sales deadlines or, holiday deadlines and things like that. Quarterly deadlines for, calculating or increasing profit.
Back then, companies had an incentive to release games that could be completed without requiring any patches, because sending out patches was actually very expensive, because you need to ship actual floppy disks in the mail to people, and that's expensive. Nowadays, they just release the game and they patch it every other week, and it costs nothing. So nowadays, companies don't feel the need to release non-buggy games.
And we worker ants were actually worried also about company reputation. Like in terms of, how often are we going to have to do this? Because it's kind of embarrassing. And, but again, there are so many factors we weren't considering. We're just kind of looking like, wow, are we ever going to run into anyone that had to wait for this big rigmarole to work, to play through in order to finish their game?
You ran into me.
Are we going to hear about it? Yeah. Case in point. Oh, God. And then when Outpost came out under the circumstances it did, do you remember that one?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but at that point in time, in 1994 with King's Quest VII, the internet wasn't publicly available like it is, it was in the late 90s. So by the time we got to 96 and 97, Sierra started releasing patches online. So they didn't mind the fact that they had to release patches, and it might not have been such a big deal to them.
Right, and it was working to the budget as well. It was working to the budget as well, I'm sure.
Now, first of all, you're not credited on King's Quest VII. How come you didn't get any credits?
Am I not credited?
No.
I thought I was. I don't know. Like I said, I got on it towards the end, towards the big crunch at the end. I did some, original animation from, drawn from scratch. Quite a few bits of that. But I think more so, I spent a lot of time fixing outsourced animation that wasn't up to snuff, and so maybe that played into it. I'm not sure.
Now, speaking of outsourced animation, what was it like to collaborate with outside animation studios from Russia and Croatia, given their lack of experience in computer game animation?
I mean, I didn't interact with them or suggest any input, especially since the majority of their stuff had already been delivered. I just interacted with their actual work in terms of going through and checking, views and loofs, as they call them, to see if they were up to snuff or to see if they could be improved in any way, see if anything in particular needed to be redone. I don't recall that there was ever very much of that, specifically like redoing something from scratch. There might have been. But yeah, it was mostly pushing pixels, fixing a couple frames here and there, or adding a frame because something doesn't look quite as smooth as it should.
So the problems were mainly in the style of several frames in each animation, or the fact that it was too different from other animations in that particular scene, or what exactly was the problem?
So that was you have to remember the whole project was very soon after Eastern Europe opened up, or communism fell, and suddenly all these companies were getting work from Western countries. And in the meantime, when you talk about animation, definitely huge stylistic differences developed in Eastern Europe versus elsewhere in the world, all throughout the years. And so they, whereas like in the West, things tended to look more Disney-ish, Eastern Europe actually had kind of a wider variety of styles. And none of them were quite like Disney. They're very stylized. Some of them were more like print cartoon styles, for lack of a better term. And so when these companies started getting work from the West, they had to adapt. They had to suddenly draw like Disney when they weren't necessarily, or they hadn't necessarily been doing that. And so, yeah, a lot of it was just kind of awkward draftsmanship really on the characters, because something wasn't kept consistent from frame to frame, and it could have been handled a little better. And we, for the most part, we understood why it was happening. It was just a matter of, we have to go back in and minimize it as much as possible. Which is why, like, you'll see in the opening movie, and I believe even in the box art, you'll see Rosella's hands switching between 3 and 4 fingers. In some cases, one hand has 3 fingers, one has 4, plus the thumb. Yeah.
Well, she has 4 fingers throughout the game, but are there any particular parts in which she has 3 fingers?
I think in the opening movie,
the 3 fingers and the thumb.
Yeah, I think she has it that way in the opening movie.
Mm-hmm.
But then either later on in the opening movie or shortly thereafter in the game, it switches to 4. And then there might be, I'm pretty sure there's, parts here and there where it kind of switches again. And that's one of the things we're trying to make consistent. And I don't know that we managed to get everything.
A while ago, Karen Nestor sent me a few documents she found in her garage. Here are the generic views of Valenice, Rosella, and Rosella as a troll, and the character sheets.
Oh, yeah.
And some of the animations themselves.
Nice.
Now, As we just discussed, the game had to be rushed in order to hit the shelves in time for Christmas 1994. Were there any sacrifices made in terms of content or quality due to this tight deadline in your process or in your team?
I'm not sure because, like I said, I was coming in towards the end. I think anything that would have been cut was already cut, and I wasn't necessarily privy to it. All I know is there's a big crunch. Just, here's what we need to do. Here's what we absolutely need to get done to make our shipping date. And, everybody was assigned their duties and kind of put their nose to the grindstone to do it. God, I remember, the year in Israel, we had the American Thanksgiving holiday. I think it's the third Thursday in November.
Mm-hmm.
And so the day before was actually super heavy with crunch because everyone was going to have the next couple days off. So we wanted to get we wanted to be, that was like as artists, that was our absolute deadline date, if I remember. And I had the flu or pneumonia or something. And I just remember being over my drawing table. Back in those days, kids, we drew on paper. We didn't have these fancy Cintiqs and iPads. So, I'm leaning over my drawing table, kind of passing out because I'm feeling so miserable. But going, I must go on, must finish. And I did, and I went home and I just passed out for probably the rest of the night.
Hey, all the Sierra games are usually released around late November, so just in time for Black Friday.
Yeah.
Probably without any discounts because it's a new product, but just in time for Black Friday.
Yeah, I'm sure the warehouse people who duplicated the discs and packaged everything, I'm sure they worked like nonstop that weekend to get this all accomplished.
Now, if you're given the opportunity to remaster or revisit King's Quest VII, what improvements would you prioritize to bring the game up to modern standards?
Well, 4K resolution for starters. And with that would require a remaster of the animation itself. So I presume everyone, every studio, even ones that we outsource to, I presume that even international ones by now are up to speed on how to draw Disney style. So I expect it would work out a lot better.
Now, still in 1994, it seems like the people at Sierra wanted to show the world just how fun it was to work there.
The fun has just begun.
Oh, of course.
The fun has just begun.
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 The fun has just begun, buddy.
The fun has just begun. The fun has just begun.
The fun has just begun!
Was this done at gunpoint?
That was done before my time, I think. I actually don't remember them producing that. But I will say that one of the things I very much admired about Sierra was exactly those efforts to engage the customer, the end user, and kind of create a feeling of community. I remember when we started using the internet more widely, one of the first things they did was set up forums for the users where they could trade, just game hints or just general conversation about the games, and we were encouraged to engage people. If it wasn't required by any means, but we're like, we were told feel free and use common sense. Don't get into any flame wars or anything like that. But
even though giving away hints for free would hurt the bottom line of Sierra, because hint books were a pretty lucrative business at Sierra. And sometimes even when it comes to piracy, because, people who pirated the games still had to buy the hint books. So this was a form of taxation for people who pirated the game.
Right. Well, I mean, in a lot of cases, people collected the games as much as they people collected the hint books as much as they collected the games, whether through piracy or legal purchases. But so, you could either get a very specific hint online, or you could have the hint book and just have everything at your hand, at your fingers whenever you need it. You post a request for a hint, you're kind of gambling that someone's going to be willing to let you know, or willing to, you're gambling that someone who knows is going to see it to begin with, and that they'll provide you with an answer. So I couldn't see that cutting too much into the sales of the hint books.
Well, maybe it got into the fact that people were calling the hint line. And the hint line cost like $1 a minute.
Yeah.
So at the hint line, you'd get an answer for one specific question.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
And so you no longer need to call the hint line.
Yeah. Good point.
So in 1995, you were credited for additional animations on Space Quest VI, Roger Wilco in the Spinal Frontier.
Yes.
What can you share about your work on this game?
I had been working on The Realm, actually. And that game had kind of a troubled development, and I somehow or other ended up on Space Quest in the interim. I think by then I was planning on either moving on from Sierra or moving up here. I'm in Washington State now, but I moved up here way back when to work at Sierra's corporate headquarters. And I think by then I was already considering doing that. So I think I was just put on kind of a shorter term project in case that happened. And that was Space Quest VI at the time, again, kind of on the tail end of development, just needing a little extra push in the art department. And so, that was another fun project, obviously. Very, how can I say? It was a fun environment because being a funny game in itself, the people working on it were kind of the ones with the drier, more sarcastic senses of humor, which appealed to me, and, it was kind of a fun time. A lot of inside jokes, lots of chop busting, so to speak.
Do you remember any particular scenes or characters that you worked on?
Yeah, it's funny. The other day when you released your third playthrough of Space Quest VI with Steve, Bill, and Josh,
Mm-hmm.
I think it was Space Quest Historian was asking about whether I did anything specific at the tail end of the game that they were playing. And the one thing I might have done was something in the one screen that looked like the old Windows 3.1, where he's walking among the icons and he's reaching up and doing things to different icons. I think I might have done one or two of those things, but I don't quite remember. The one thing I do remember specifically doing was when he was in the stomach and he has to make he has to pick up a couple items to make a grappling hook and then shape the grappling hook and throw it and work his way out. I remember working on that specifically.
Okay. So first of all, in the last stream, I mentioned that the Windows 3.1 part is my favorite part of the game, including the sys-any joke.
Yeah.
And so it's great to hear that you were part of that part of the game. And did you work on the animation of the grappling hook, or just that particular scene in which Roger picks up the objects?
No, the animation itself. I remember drawing everything out on paper and pencil testing it, as it's called, and and then handing it off to be colored.
And the Space Quest 6 demo featured a standalone story with unique content which wasn't present in the final game. Were you involved in creating animations or contributions to that demo?
No. I don't remember that. That must have been done long before I worked on it. Because as I remember, I only worked on it a couple of months.
Well, as we've seen with Sierra, usually the last couple of months is like 80% of the entire project.
For certain things, yeah, not necessarily for the stuff I was, responsible for.
And while King's Quest VII drew inspiration from these movies, what references did you draw from to bring the animations of Space Quest VI to life?
Which ones did I personally draw from?
Yeah.
I don't know that I personally drew from anything other than just drawing whatever it was that Roger had to do. That's kind of one of my regrets, is that I didn't get on that project in time to be able to draw like any of the goofy aliens throughout the game that you see in like like in the beginning when Roger goes on shore leave, or whatever term they used for it. He goes onto that planet and just runs into a bunch of aliens in a club, and you click on them and they do all kinds of silly things. I was not involved with any of that, and to me that sucks. Because I would have been totally in my element there.
So you were adding animations to existing characters, or did you mainly work on Roger and animations of Roger doing stuff?
I think I'm pretty sure I mainly worked on Roger, and it was mostly like, here's a space where we still need animation, but it was, a minor thing. He needs to throw launch the grappling hook so he can climb up, and we don't have any of that. Or we have part of it, but we need this bridging sequence to connect the two. Hey Al, can you handle that? And that was mostly the nature of my involvement. Also, I'm sure there were a couple of instances of, this doesn't look quite right. Would you mind going in and pixel pushing and fixing this little disparity?
And what animation software did you primarily use for this project, and as well as during your time at Sierra in general?
Early on when I started, it was all Deluxe Paint or D-Paint Animator, which is the lower resolution version with more animation features in it. I'm trying to think, there's another one, but that came later on. Was it Animator Pro or something like that? Yeah, I think it was called Animator Pro. But like I said, that's later on.
It's interesting because at LucasArts, they also use D-Paint for their adventure games.
Yeah, it's pretty standard software. It's funny because, about a year or two ago, I was back on the East Coast visiting family, and I went into the local library where I knew a friend of mine from high school worked, and she was showing me around, and she says, "Oh, and excuse the mess. This is our our storage space. They're in a temporary space. They're fixing up the regular library, but they had a space with like all kinds of books and other materials piled up just kind of haphazardly. And she explained that these are donations that people gave us for us to, either lend out or sell to earn a little extra money or whatever. And I'm looking around, and right in there is a box of Deluxe Paint Animator for the Amiga. And I'm going, whoa. And it was I totally flashed back. I said, Natalie, let me tell you about this. This is the software I used when I first moved out west. This is amazing. Like, looking at the box, it kind of brings back memories. And she very graciously passed it off and let me keep it. So
you can finally create games for your Amiga computer.
Yeah. So it's back east in my old bedroom closet, waiting for admission into my future computer game museum of some kind.
Now, still in 1995, you are credited for animation on Torin's Passage. What can you share about your work on that game?
Okay, so Torin's Passage, I think it was the first game at Sierra I worked on from beginning to end. So I found out about it. It was made up here in Washington, but they'd started working on it when I was still in Oakhurst, and I was still on Space Quest VI, and we got a hold of a promotional video, the pre-Christmas promotional video they made for it. And I was personally blown away by what they were doing. It kind of seemed like, hey, animation is finally like holding its own in computer games with this one. And, with the mistakes that were made on, I wouldn't say mistakes, but just the situation with the outsourcing that happened on King's Quest VII, kind of gave us a heads up as to what to avoid during Torin's Passage and any other game going forward. So it was clear to me at the time, like, especially hearing things through the grapevine, that, hopefully a lot of that stuff was going to be avoided. And it was going to be a little smoother. Little did I know that was not entirely correct. But once I saw Torin's Passage, that's when I started pushing more to come up here and, to start working at their headquarters.
Torin's Passage convinced you to move in a way?
Not by itself, but I mean, backtracking a little bit. I'm from New Jersey, which is essentially the New York City area. So moving 3,000 miles west to the middle of the mountains to a small town where the nearest city was Fresno, and that was 45 minutes to an hour away. It was a big culture shock for me. And just, I don't know, kind of the politics of the town kind of bothered me. And there was a few things that happened that, like, had nothing to do with Sierra, that kind of made me go, is this area truly right for me, or should I consider moving elsewhere? And so I mean, I was in Oakhurst for only about a year. And then fortunately I was accepted up here at the headquarters and put to work on Torin's Passage. And that ended up being somewhat of a trial by fire almost, because the Jim Murphy, the art director, I'm trying to think, was the art director or was the animation lead? I think he pretty much served as both. He was a super talented guy. And he went on to work at Pixar, which I think he's still there.
Mm-hmm. He was the lead animator on Torin's Passage.
Yeah. Oh man, that guy, I hated it at the time, but I'm so thankful for it now. He was brutal with some of the stuff I did. He's like, no, dude, you're not getting it. And, here's what you're not thinking about. Here's what you could have done. Now go back and fix it. It's like, oh my God, dude. I don't know if he's just going military on me to make me work more effectively, or if he's like actually getting mad at me. But, I'm grateful he gave me the chance, and I vastly improved between Torin's Passage and Legends of Larry 7, which was the next project. But we can still talk about Torin's if you have any.
Yeah, what were some of the revisions that he asked you to do in your animations?
I don't know if I remember anything specific. It was just a lot of general stuff. Timing might be off on something. Perspective might be off on, I'm animating something coming forward in perspective, and a couple of the frames look off, or I didn't kind of, sometimes before you animate stuff, you kind of plot it out, or you thumbnail it. And maybe there was like a technical issue of some kind that I didn't consider before I did so. Or I jumped too fast into the animation and totally bypassed thinking about something else. I mean, at the time, like, I and the other animators working on it were fresh out of art school pretty much still. So there was quite a bit of that. And I mean, there's always feedback and changes to do anyway. You read any of the books about animation history at the old cartoon studios. A lot of people relate similar stories like this about getting so frustrated because they're doing the best they can, or what they thought was the best they can, and they get criticized and their work gets torn up, and they go back to their desks just kind of a little disgruntled, or just humbled, and they have to start from scratch and really work harder at putting their best foot forward.
And do you remember any particular scenes or characters that you worked on in the game?
Yeah, let me think. Actually, one of the ones that I worked on that got reassigned to someone else because I was just taking too long figuring the damn thing out was in the opening movie when Torin is sent into town to run some errand, and he's walking forward, and I believe he crosses like a little bridge, and he's talking to Boogle about how he's sick and tired of this farm life and he wants to be a hero. I think that's one of the ones where it was at least partially taken away from me and reassigned to someone else, and here, Al, do this instead. Oh, God damn it. Okay. I did the two-headed vulture. I did the snails, just various little characters throughout the game. I mean, the majority of the game is just random little characters anyway. I did some stuff with Torin here and there. Considerable amount, I'd say I did of Torin, but there was just so much of it in general. I think it might have been pretty evenly split between three of us. Oh, I was going to say, I was actually trying to remember how much of the Torin's work was outsourced. I'm sure some of it was. But definitely to a lesser extent than Quest VII. And I think even Larry 7 as the next game, I think we outsourced even a little bit more than Torin's.
Well, according to the credits, the company that used to outsource the animations was LA West. They were the ones who used outsourced animations. And you worked directly with LA West.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Now, still in 1995, Sierra underwent a significant transition toward FMV games. Were there moments where you were concerned that your animation skills might become obsolete or less in demand?
Not really. Not as much as now. No, but yeah, no, I mean, the big consideration at the time was how soon are we going to have to learn 3D? Because that's where graphics were clearly going. FMV was still kind of an open question. But even at the time, they kind of seemed to us almost like a different genre of game, if that makes sense.
It does, but
It seemed like they had like almost a different audience. You know, everybody was trying to go Hollywood with games, and at the time, Hollywood, there was a clear separation between live action movies and animated movies. And so I don't remember the thought ever crossing my mind that, oh my God, everything's going to go to FMV and, I'm going to be out of a job. And besides, if it did, they'd still need people to clean up the video. And that would have become my job because I actually helped out a little bit on Phantasmagoria for a couple of days, erasing halos around Victoria Morcell and whoever else in the game.
And so I saw that you mentioned in the past that at one point you did video cleanup on the game itself. And so the halos were what you removed the blue outline that was there because of the chroma key.
The residue, the chroma key residue on the image.
And so you went frame by frame and just had to clean it up?
Yeah, it was tedious. It was tedious, but not as, not any more tedious than going in pixel by pixel and cleaning up pencil artwork and coloring it. It was kind of the same concept. You just had to be a lot more careful because it seemed like, if you tweak the wrong pixel on essentially a photographic video, it's going to be a lot more obvious.
It's interesting because the Sega Saturn version of Phantasmagoria does have the chroma key residue, and I don't think they used your work on that version because in the PC it's pretty spot on. Don't have any chroma key halo or don't see any blue outlines, but on the Sega Saturn version, it's pretty visible in every scene. So you should have used your work.
Maybe. I'm sure that there were cases where, more of it was evident than somewhere else on another scene. But
I know the game by heart.
Yeah,
it's fine.
Yeah.
And so you worked on the in-game animations and the walk cycles and removing artifacts from that, or did you actually work on FMV scenes as well?
Are you talking about Phantasmagoria?
Yep.
I wasn't I don't think I did any of the walk cycles. I think it was a specific scene or two from within the game. Like I said, it was only like literally a couple of days where we were waiting on a decision for something else on Space Quest VI or something, where for some reason or another work was put on hold for a day or two, and they said, "Oh, well, great, you guys are available, so here, work on this in the meantime."
And do you remember which scenes you worked on?
No, not at all. I've never actually played through Phantasmagoria. I know.
Neither of them?
No, neither of them, no.
Jeez.
So, if I can jump ahead a little bit, though, my most significant memory of Phantasmagoria was actually Phantasmagoria 2. I remember somebody, I can't remember who it was, And I don't want to name names because I could get the name wrong and I'll be casting aspersions on someone. But we were working on either Torin's Passage or Larry at the time. And
Larry.
somebody on the Fantas 2 team said, hey, guys, check out this videotape. We have auditions. We have women auditioning for the dominatrix role in the game. And so, yeah, there was some pretty racy stuff.
Well, I was about to ask you about Phantasmagoria too.
Yeah.
And we'll get to that. And so, did you manage to hold on to any of the original uncompressed footage from Phantasmagoria 1? Footage that you've worked on?
No, I can't imagine that I'd have that anywhere. And if I did have it, I'd have no idea how I'd open it these days because there are some pretty archaic file formats.
No, maybe you had it on VHS tapes. Who knows?
Oh, I see what you're saying. No, I had nothing like that.
And these aren't archaic formats, given the fact that there's the SCI viewer that I constantly use to find unused animations in all of the Sierra games. And so if you use SCI viewer, you can see all of the in-game animations.
Yes, that is a great tool. And I'll tell you what, I used it a few months ago to get at some files that that I'd worked on back in the day. One of my, I wouldn't call it a goal, but I would call it minor interests, I suppose. If I ever have time and I can get around to it, maybe I'll do this sort of activities. Would be to go back into some of this old stuff, because there are definitely scenes that were shipped in the game that I'm not entirely satisfied with, and go back in and access them and improve them and then export them back into the game and see how they play out. So I got the first couple parts of that, down pat, thanks to the SCI viewer. I can get at the file and I can get at the frames, and I can, use them as reference to create a new animation. But then how do I get that back into the game without disturbing anything else? So
well, there are tools for that as well.
Yeah. Hey, if somebody wants to get a hold of me and give me some advice, by all means, let me know.
Oh, now that everyone knows that you're planning a remaster of your own, then yeah. I'm sure that people will be happy to help. Around the same time, in 1995, this photo was taken.
Oh my God. How'd you get a hold of that? Yeah. Yeah, so 3 of those 4 people have nothing to do with Sierra, but... yeah,
but you have a Sierra t-shirt.
Right, yeah, the one on the right wearing a Sierra shirt definitely did.
Do you still have that Sierra shirt?
No, I do not. Or if I do, it's in storage somewhere.
It's worth millions nowadays, I presume.
Well, hey, I'll be selling it if I ever find it.
So this was taken around 95, 96, right?
Yeah, that was one of my visits back east. Those are 2 of those guys are buddies of mine. The third one, I have no idea who that is. They'll be happy to know that this was shown on YouTube for the world to see.
Yeah. Maybe we'll find out who the third person is.
Yeah.
Usually my conversations with Sierra people get random people to the live chat that eventually turn out to be key people from Sierra at the time. And so, for example, when I had my conversation with Steve Conrad, and Bill Shockley turned into a live chat. And when I live streamed with Bill and Steve, then Josh Mandel hopped in the live chat. So who knows? Maybe the third person, whoever that may be, will pop in the chat and say, I'm the third person.
Those guys are all hoodlums from back east. None of them works in games.
So when did you transfer to the Bellevue office?
Oh, early 1995, actually. Yeah, because it was like literally almost a year after I got hired at Sierra in Oakhurst.
So your work on Phantasmagoria 1, the video cleanup you did, was it in Oakhurst or
Yeah, it was in
Bellevue?
Oakhurst. Yeah.
So that was done in late 1994?
Yes,
Because if you
the
moved to Bellevue in early 1995, that means that you worked on Phantasmagoria at Oakhurst in late 1994?
it might have been, I mean, it could have been shortly before I worked on Space Quest VI as well. I don't remember the exact timeline. But like I said, I remember there being either a pause or just a brief delay in finding a spot for a couple people. And we're, handed a couple scenes from Phantasmagoria and told, here, help clean it up.
And what, in your opinion, was the major difference between the offices?
The major difference. Oh boy. Well, I mean, you've seen pictures of the buildings, haven't you?
Yep.
The Bellevue office, I mean, was more of a professional office building. There were other companies in there at the time. It was in some ways more open. We had it was more based on cubicles, where the Oakhurst office was kind of they had big open rooms, and you just kind of sat around their periphery, next to the person you're working with without walls separating you. There we go. Yeah, I'm looking at the building. I'm trying to think. So Sierra actually ended up having. All right, yeah, that's the building I worked in. They actually had two buildings in Bellevue. Like there was this one at first, and then a few years later, they had one a couple blocks away. That I was gone from Sierra by then, so I'm not entirely sure where that was or which building that was. But see that second floor corner office?
Over here?
No, in the front there.
Over here?
Yeah. That is where all the Al Lowe magic happened. That was Al Lowe's office, where we'd watch, TV during lunchtime and have design meetings and all that good stuff.
He had a TV in his office. That was pretty badass back in the 90s.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, and we'd play Nintendo 64 in a closet, in a walk-in closet. For research. We'd spend hours in there playing. Hey, come here. Oh, I want to provide a counterpoint to Bill Shockley's cat.
Wow.
This is Tippy. This is Tippy the Chiweenie. She's my little companion.
Could have named her after a Sierra character.
Yeah, she came pre-named.
Now, in February 1996, Sierra was acquired by CUC International and became part of CUC Software. What were your initial thoughts on the acquisition?
I and most of the other people had kind of like an overwhelming sense of confusion, because CUC was a weird conglomerate of companies. They had hotels, they owned hotels. They owned Avis Rent-A-Car. They owned, what was the thing called? Was it the Dream Book? There was some there was some book that came out every year, a coupon book, like a thick-ish sort of thing, and you'd buy them maybe at banks or other institutions like that. You'd pay maybe $20 for this thing, and then there would be hundreds of dollars worth of coupons for various things inside, but they owned that and some other things. And we're going, okay, why are they wanting to buy Sierra other than the fact that one of their people is on the board of directors? But, some people high up were pretty much, suggesting to stockholders that we go ahead and approve the merger or the sale. So we did. And I'm sure you're going to get into what happened next.
We'll soon get to that.
Yeah. But yeah, confusion. Why are they so diverse, and why are they trying to diversify further? What's the end run here?
Well, it's very natural for a coupon company to want to acquire a computer game company.
Exactly.
Makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
In the 1996 holiday season, it seemed like Sierra focused on releasing games for mature audiences. And so they released Phantasmagoria 2 and Leisure Suit Larry 7 on the same day. Now, I know that you're not credited on Phantasmagoria 2, but given that you were at the Bellevue office at the time, did you get to hear any interesting stories about its production, apart from getting to watch the casting tapes for the Dominatrix?
I can't say I personally remember hearing any big, stories from the production. I mean, we'd hear them for sure, because they were in our general area, and we would on occasion see the game getting tested and things like that. But I don't remember anything very out of the ordinary, any crazy stories or anything like that. Lorelei Shannon was around, so she would, spitball game design ideas, or, just ideas for horror situations and things like that. Yeah, she's a really cool person, by the way. But yeah, I don't think that I nor anyone else I worked closely with was too involved or aware of the production of Phantasmagoria 2.
So you just got the tapes for the casting of the Dominatrix, and that's it?
Yeah. That's all we needed to see. Yeah, we approve. She's good.
By the way, they're still best friends. The lead actor and Ragnar played the Dominatrix in the game. Yep.
Oh, okay. Nice. And if it wasn't for Sierra, that would have never happened.
True. Now, in addition to Phantasmagoria 2, like I said, Leisure Suit Larry Love for Sale was released on the same day. And in that game, you're credited for animation. What can you tell me about your involvement?
Okay, well, Leisure Suit Larry 7 was bar none the most fun project I've worked on ever in my career. Boy, what can I say about Larry? There are multitudes of stories. I was thinking about this earlier. So first of all, the society's attitudes about certain things, about what's appropriate, were way different then than they are now. That I doubt that game would get made today. And certainly the production environment, half the stuff in the production environment we had for that game would not be allowed. But that being said, it was understood that, yes, this is a Leisure Suit Larry game. Yes, the humor isn't for everyone. However, it is getting made. It is, part of the package with the game. So if you work at Sierra and you're not on the project, but you feel you might be offended by some of the stuff in the game, take care and not to walk by the area that the game's being produced in. Boy, how can I don't even know how to describe some of the stuff delicately. We had Playboy magazines in the office for reference. Somebody brought them in. One of our guys, I'm not going to name names, but as I said, the Bellevue office was had more cubicles easily than the Oakhurst office. Somebody in the Leisure Suit Larry area, it wasn't me, that's all I'll say, made themselves a door out of a big piece of cardboard. It was like a kind of like a sliding door for their cubicle, if you can picture that. They took a couple of Playboy centerfolds and pinned them on the inside. And then one day he went out to lunch, left the door, slid back, his cardboard door, slid it open and went to lunch. It was, I don't know if you guys have ever seen an animation desk. It's basically, it's like a tall kind of thing. It's got shelves on top, and then it's got the tilted surface to draw on with an animation disc in it. But anyway, he was sliding this big piece of cardboard behind the raised shelves of the animation desk so that you couldn't see the piece of cardboard once it was back there. Somebody, again, not me, while he was out, took the cardboard, flipped it around so that the centerfolds are facing outward, and slid it back behind the desk. So the guy comes back from lunch, just, habitually goes back in his cubicle, reaches behind him and closes the cardboard, the door. And the centerfolds are facing out. And I don't remember. I think he noticed it himself, fortunately. I don't think anyone said anything, but he eventually turned around and noticed, what the heck? Who turned my door around? And a good laugh was had by all because he was so embarrassed.
Wait, so none of the other employees ever visited your office to see what was going on?
No, they did. I mean, people are so sensitive today. People were, you had to have a certain sense of humor working for Sierra back then anyway. So lots of people came through our area and wanted to check out what we were doing and have a laugh. More, I dare say, more than would likely admit it.
Wait, so it was company policy, like telling employees who might be offended not to go by? At the time you had Phantasmagoria 2 produced, which had some raunchy and violent scenes, and Phantasmagoria 1, which had a sex scene and violent scenes. So basically, every room you'd go into, you'd have some kind of problematic game in production.
Yeah, I mean, things were generally casual. It wasn't like an order came down from on high where Ken or whoever said, hey, stay away from this area if you're going to be offended by this, that, or the other. It was just more like there was an understanding, and people knew. And so that really kind of minimized problems, really, or potential problems.
And did Ken and Roberta ever visit your office?
Oh, yeah. They, especially because they were good friends with Al Lowe, who sat pretty much, his office was like a couple cubicles away from me. So they were down there all the time. And then I would talk to him. And that's how I discovered that Roberta and I share a birthday.
Wow.
Yeah.
Really?
So we kind of got friendly on that.
Now we can celebrate both your birthdays.
Yeah. February 16th.
Can you walk me through your creative process during the production of this game?
Leisure Suit Larry.
Mm-hmm.
The creative process. Well, let's see. Al and Don Munsell came up with the design document. They, of course, didn't think of everything all at once. It was kind of an evolutionary process. But, they gradually figure out the ideas that they want to commit to. And from there, we identify, backgrounds, room designs, and things like that. What characters are going to be needed, how they'll look. And there's usually, before work starts in earnest on animation or anything else, there's usually like a few rounds of just concept art where we, draw out, hey, maybe this character could look like this, or maybe this room could, have this, that, or the other in it. And, we can do, we can have this kind of joke, and we could put this phallic symbol, we can make this thing into a phallic symbol of some kind. And so that's usually, discussed for a while, and, sketches pinned up around the office. And that's the other thing too, speaking of, the content, as, the content of the games, and, people knowing what to expect when they walk through an area, is, there's the matter of we're concepting stuff out all the time and pinning it up on the wall. So what can you handle seeing? That it was something that other people outside the project would have to decide for themselves if they wanted to come into our area. But yeah, in fact, a lot of the concept work early on, especially like when the design was initially getting worked on as well, was determining the art style of the game, because we ended up with, sort of the cartoony art style we would naturally gravitate towards anyway. But we actually experimented with a few variations of it. And, we kind of considered one thing or another. There's, I guess, as one of the loose files found on the Larry 7 CD, where you were talking about the SCI resource viewer being able to find these things. There was an animated GIF of an alternate version of Larry. It's kind of like a walk cycle. He's just walking along, and he looks a little different. He doesn't really look the way he does in the game. His pants are more like bell bottoms. He's got pointy shoes, whatever. That was actually something I did early on, like experimenting with a slightly different style. What else can I say? One of the unsung heroes of Leisure Suit Larry 7, well, Sierra in general, but Leisure Suit Larry 7 in particular, Memo Diaz, who is one of our concept artists. He was great at, he still is great at like pinup art, cheesecake and, pretty women and things like that. So we were lucky to have him, and he was concepting out a lot of the women, and his stuff unfortunately isn't, or I haven't seen as publicized as it should be. And I wish I had some of his stuff with me now. It's probably out in my garage somewhere if I have anything of his, but it's pretty amazing stuff. But yeah, I mean, from concept art, we pick out what we like. We decide on the art style. There it is. Exactly. And then Jason Zayas drew the woman right beneath him, which that might have been one of the concept pieces too.
This is another. These are resource files that are on the final CD, but didn't make it into the game.
Right. Yeah.
So this was your animation?
That's my animation. I want to say Jason Zayas drew the woman below that on the previous page.
Mm-hmm.
And then Bill O'Brien drew Captain Thigh there beneath her.
Okay.
If I'm recognizing their styles correctly.
It's not vastly different from the final game. It's just that the walk cycle, he's waving his hands more than he does in the final game.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that was close to what we ended up with. I tried a couple other styles of Larry. They weren't that great. I don't know why we didn't just stick with, the previous style Larry from 5 and 6. We were just trying to do our own thing, leave our own mark on the character, I suppose.
I presume that after Sierra released King's Quest VII and Torin's Passage, it seemed like the natural progression of the art style. I mean, it's Disney-esque Leisure Suit Larry.
Right, yeah. Yeah, Disney-esque, I guess, would be fair. We definitely had a couple of more stylized looks we were tinkering with early on, but I doubt, even if we'd chosen to go with one of them, I doubt we would have been able to consistently stay on that just because of our, just our natural inclinations.
And which scene or character posed the greatest creative or technical challenge for you during the animation process?
Bill and Jason kind of took all the women for themselves. Probably because my realistic or semi-realistic anatomy was not top notch at that point. I'm gotta say, in my defense, I'm a lot better now. So I think any scene where I had to draw a woman, it kind of got to be more of a pain in the ass than other things, I would say. Yeah, definitely challenging. I'm trying to think if there's anything else in particular that there was an extended scene towards the end. Actually in Captain Thigh's quarters, where Larry walks in and first sees the room, and you have the stones rising up out of the water. If you remember that, it's like one of the last cut scenes.
Mm-hmm.
He walks into the room, he looks around, he plucks a flower and smells it. Like, I wouldn't call that so much a challenge as one of the more, one of the longer scenes I did, I guess, that required a little more thought. It was kind of fun to come up with. And by the way, let me see if I can find something here to hold up to the camera.
What do you have there, Al?
I have original Larry art that I did not dig it out for this interview, but it happened to be right next to me as I was preparing today.
Lucky me.
So I can show you a couple scenes. So this is rough artwork. This would be this would have been cleaned up on a separate sheet of paper and then scanned and colored.
Wow.
So there's Larry in the process of sitting on a toilet. Let me see. I saw another one here. You let me know if I'm going too far.
No,
this stuff.
I've got all day.
Oh, speaking of which, the scene I just described. You know what? We're going to go old school. We're going to go totally old school on this. And I'm going to attempt to flip my animation drawings. Let's see. The way that people who learned animation later digitally don't know how to do anymore. But I'll have to stand up for this. Let's see if I can get this effectively in camera range. Oh, okay. Okay, so there's animation paper. Okay, here we go. Ready?
Yep.
There's Larry walking out as I was describing earlier. Looks around. Right here, right about here, let's see, he picked the flower and he sniffed it. The papers aren't really lined up well enough to effectively flip that section. But oh, there he is.
Mm-hmm.
And he reaches out and captures this little sphere that comes in, and then a helmet, and then puts it on his head.
Wow.
So
this is amazing.
So this is actual Sierra production art. Where is it? There he is. Boom.
So you had to scan each and every one of these pages and then color it in the computer?
Yep. What a rigmarole, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in the days before Procreate or Krita or any of the other, or TV Paint and Toon Boom.
Kids nowadays won't understand the struggle.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, everything back then, well, I say everything, I mean, like in terms of movies and TV productions were done the same way as well. There was no escaping it. There's no faster way to do it. As opposed to, today where you could just draw on the screen or do it in 3D. And what's interesting is I show this to people today and they go, wow, you guys have to do all that work. You have to go, that must have taken so long. Yeah, it's like I said earlier, like I just said, it's like such a rigmarole. And I'm thinking, it's a rigmarole, but it's no more of a rigmarole than modeling a character, sculpting them, generating normal maps, ambient occlusion maps, all these other maps that you're going to end up putting on them depending on how intricate your game is. And then building a skeleton, rigging it, making sure it animates correctly, painting textures. I mean, there's one way or another, whether you're drawing it back in the day or making a character for a modern game, there's rigmarole involved. It's a process.
Yeah, but anything that happens in the physical realm always looks more tedious or old school to some people.
Yeah.
So sure, you can draw on your computer, but erasing a line or moving a line is easier when you do it on your computer than to actually take an eraser.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah, and in some cases, you have to redraw the whole thing versus, copying and pasting a piece of something on screen. Yeah, nowadays it's a checkbox on a video conferencing tool.
Exactly. If you were to animate a deleted scene or character that didn't make it into the final game, what would it have been and why?
I don't know that we had any deleted scenes per se or characters. I suppose me personally, I would have added in a gag with the little dog from Larry 1 because that's such an iconic piece of animation when he walks in and pees on Larry and walks off. I should have, I didn't thought to make him a running joke in Larry 7 where he comes in and does different things. Yeah, Al Lowe was. I was going to say Al Lowe was big on running gags in this game, so we had, his big thing was, at the end of every set of puzzles with every woman that Larry solves, he has to end up naked and sneaking back to his room, trying not to get seen. And in every case, he has to get seen by something different. And this is like one of like 2 or 3 elements of the game. Like he and I sat down and brainstormed. And oh my God, when he was, he had me do the traditional part where Ken Williams shows up in the game. And so he's the balloon animal guy at the top of the ship. Mm-hmm. On that one deck. And he sits down with me and he's like, okay, well, the joke is that, he's going to make a phallic balloon shape every time. And it's going to be the exact same thing because we don't want to turn this into a whole big multiple animation thing for you. But, the joke's going to be that every time it looks the same, but he says it's something different. So what can we say? What kind of funny things can we have him say that the balloon is, And man, I just remember him laughing, like sitting down with me and like brainstorming all this and laughing like a mischievous kid, just anticipating busting Ken's chops like that.
And did you use any rotoscoping techniques to capture maybe realistic movement for in-game animations?
Not in
this
games.
Game or in some of the previous games we talked about?
Not rotoscoping per se. I mean, we did on occasion use video reference if we just wanted to see in general how something appeared or what an action would look like broken down into poses. But yeah, not rotoscoping. I'm trying to think. I think Quest for Glory 4, either 3 or 4, possibly both, used that technique. Because I remember seeing video, as files, not on tape or anything, but I remember seeing video of various coworkers acting out certain things like playing a violin and while dancing. And then, a character from the game basically traced off of that. So, the technique was used to some degree, just not anything I worked on.
Now, a lot of the games we talked about are humorous in nature. What tricks did you use to make a character's actions funny?
I mean, when you're talking humorous games, or characters, it's all in how you exaggerate the motion. I mean, there's different ways to exaggerate. You exaggerate to kind of add emphasis to the motion. But then beyond that, if you're trying to be funny, you exaggerate to, just include the little funny bits of business, as it used to be called. I'm trying to think of an example. I remember not in my work, but Jim Murphy, again, the art lead on Torin's Passage. Before he left for Pixar, he helped out a little bit at the beginning of Larry 7. And he had an animation of Larry, rolling a pair of dice, playing craps.
Mm-hmm.
And you barely notice it, but if you go frame by frame, you see that at one point he like accidentally bumps his nose and it kind of bends in a funny way as he's shaking the dice. And even if you don't notice it, it kind of comes through as like a little eccentricity in the animation, where the person goes, "Oh wait, what was that?" Oh yeah. It's a little noticeable, even though you might not see exactly what it is. And so you definitely feel it. For things that you actually want to be noticeable or seen longer, you kind of have to make more frames of it closer in position to one another, or just hold one frame for longer so it's noticeable.
And looking back, are there any aspects of Sierra's classic animation style that you think were particularly groundbreaking?
I mean, everything we were doing was, based off of traditional animation techniques that dated back decades. I don't know about groundbreaking unless you can, you'd have to include all computer games in this aspect. But, as far as like being interactive in the sense that they're interactive cartoons, I suppose that could be called groundbreaking. But again, that's, all computer games, really, I would think. I would say, I was going to say credit where it's due. I kind of feel like, in some ways, LucasArts pushed the quality aspect of that a lot more than we did. Not to underplay myself or anyone else I worked with, but yeah, I mean, we honestly looked at some of that LucasArts stuff and really admired it. And, many was a time we saw something and we thought, oh God, why couldn't we have done something like that?
Well, on the other hand, LucasArts released less games per year.
Yeah, true. Yeah,
so they had
we
time
were all
to focus on the games themselves. And, there are, in 1995, for example, you have Full Throttle and The Dig, and that's it.
Yeah.
Well, while at Sierra, you had Phantasmagoria and Space Quest VI and Police Quest SWAT and Gabriel Knight 2.
I remember a couple games that we looked at that, just out of admiration and just because they played to our sensibilities. One was LucasArts, was Curse of Monkey Island, where we were going, oh God, we could have done, anti-aliased drawings rather than just, sharp pixely edges on this thing. If only we'd gone for a slightly higher resolution. But then also Toonstruck from Virgin was, I don't know if in hindsight I'd call it a great game, but it was a great looking game.
Well, in terms, it's an FMV game, so you got the FMV part nailed at Sierra. So you're talking about the in-game animations, the cartoony animations in the game?
Yeah.
That's what you're... Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's certainly a part of it. I was thinking just overall production values. And I said our sense. I said they kind of played to our sensibilities, and that was largely because of the animation styles.
Now, Leisure Suit Larry 7 ended with a short teaser for Leisure Suit Larry 8. Let's watch the teaser first, and then we'll discuss it.
Okay.
So, Leisure Suit Larry 8, coming in 1998, but it never did.
But it never did.
What can you tell me about this teaser?
It started off as a joke, meaning that, we just added in the UFO as a non sequitur. But then Al and other people started kind of throwing around ideas, and we were going, well, wait a minute, we could make this work. And so then all the other stuff was added to it. And it was fully our intention to make it happen. But a lot of the circumstances surrounding why it didn't kind of go back to how you mentioned CUC earlier. And things started happening because of that. Unfortunate things. Oh, but I could break your heart. I could break your heart in terms of Leisure Suit Larry 8 by disclosing some information that I happen to know and have not signed an NDA, or have never signed an NDA on.
Well,
so I'm presumably free to talk about it. No, Larry 8. If you're aware of Leisure Suit Larry Reloaded, this is, of course, years later. It's a few years ago. You're aware of Leisure Suit Larry Reloaded, and then the situation that kind of followed on the heels of that with the studio, with the publisher.
Yep.
That sidetracked a Leisure Suit Larry 8, basically. That was in the early concepting phase of planning. That was apparently going to be a follow-up project to Larry Reloaded, and then, what hit the fan, and kind of ruined that.
So the deal was to create Reloaded, and then immediately after Leisure Suit Larry 8, or?
Yeah, or it was at least a strong consideration. And I happen to know that, and forgive me if I'm wrong, I don't think I am, but Larry Ahern of LucasArts was involved with it. And Chris Willis, who was a CR artist, was concepting it. And he kind of recruited me to help him concept some things, which I ended up maybe doing like 4 or 5 sketches of stuff before everything kind of fell apart. But yeah, presumably I would have at least been able to make my case to Al to let me on the project and had it gone on. And regrettably it didn't. But yeah.
So it told me that I talked to Larry Ahern for 4.5 hours, and he just forgot to mention that he was about to work on Leisure Suit Larry 8.
Yeah, he probably wasn't on it that long. When I think about the timeline, or the time frame that everything happened in.
And this was supposed to be with Al's involvement, right?
Yes.
Leisure Suit, the actual Leisure Suit Larry sequel that we've all been waiting for.
Yes. Sorry, I told you I could break your heart. Yeah.
Well, back to Leisure Suit Larry 7, you had a few cameos in the game. Can you elaborate a bit on these cameos?
Anyone in particular, or
all of them?
All of them. Who did I cameo personally? Oh God, I remember my big thing was drawing Ron Jeremy into the game, walking around the pool area. They were mostly around the pool area, right? Is that what you're referring to?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah, I just drew Ron Jeremy in there because at the time he was kind of, he was this, gross old, porn veteran, and he just like suddenly started popping up in all kinds of mainstream movies. So I said, you know what? There's going to be a caricature of him walking around this game if I can help it. Jason Peele, who was the background artist, he was art lead, I think, as well. But I remember in one of the backgrounds he painted, it was the pool cabana. And he put up a clothesline of like Mickey Mouse's shorts and Fred Flintstone's tunic and some other things from cartoons. I remember that much. Were there any other cameos?
Were there any cameos of Al Eufrasio in the game?
Oh, yeah. We had like, we had what was it? It was like the screen basically, with Peter the Purser explaining the general rules of the game. And you see the entire team from behind as, we're the audience to him explaining the game.
And you were also in the pool.
Yeah, I guess I was swimming underwater, right? Which is complete fiction.
Skinny dipping.
Yeah. Which is total fiction. Because not only have I never gone skinny dipping, I can't really swim underwater all that well. Yeah, it seemed all centered on the pool that all this stuff was happening. Yeah, I had some characters playing volleyball that ended up being colored like Archie Comics characters. So people were going, "Oh my God, they threw in like Archie characters in the game." At the beginning of the game,
no one complained about these cameos?
Nah, not that I know of. At the beginning of the game, on the title screen, I threw in a cameo of Lunar Leaper, which was an early Sierra educational game. And it was just this big, springy eyeball on legs, It's supposed to be an alien of some kind, and I just put him as far in the background as I can get him, but while still being recognizable. And I think people on occasion have noticed it.
Now, one interesting aspect that I've become interested in is hearing what people listen to during the production of a certain game. So what album or music were you listening to on repeat when you worked on Leisure Suit Larry 7?
A lot of 90s grunge at the time, really. And that was just, someone or other would have their radio on in the office.
So you were listening to the radio, not to a particular favorite CD or something.
CDs.
Get in the zone.
I mean, it was a mix. I mean, people listen to music at work. Yeah, I mean, we weren't like listening to 70s disco hits or anything like that to get in the mood. Just pretty much contemporary music of the time. Speaking of audio, one of the most famous bits of audio, if not the most famous bits of audio in Larry 7 is the "Yeah, baby" from the Where's Dildo minigame. Do you know where that comes from?
From you?
No. So the story behind that, there was this world famous barbecue place in Bellevue. I'd say probably a good 3 or 4 miles from Sierra's office. Really good food. The first Black-owned business in Bellevue, which out here is a big deal, considering the demographics. But Gene Porter was the owner's name, and he started an auto repair shop. And, he's a mechanic. Obviously, he fixed cars. And then he realized, God, everyone comes here, they drop off their car, but then they have nowhere to go. There's no restaurants immediately nearby. So all they can do is sit around and wait and go hungry. So he would, I guess, on weekends, cook barbecue for his church. And so he bought some equipment and started cooking barbecue at his garage, and got his family to help out and everything. And little by little, the food was so good that the barbecue aspect of the business started overtaking the garage, and people started going there for lunch, during their lunch hours at work. And finally he said, okay, I'm shutting down the garage because clearly we need to get more tables in here. And, the money I make in selling food justifies it. So anyway, he was going full force by the time we were up here working on Larry 7. And there was always big crowds there at lunchtime. And he had this famous hot sauce that he called the Man. And, the big question, you go up there, he'd be walking around with a pan of this stuff and going, hey, baby, you met the Man? And you say no, and he'd give you a little bit of it on a toothpick, and it would just sear the inside of your mouth. It was painful, but it was so good on food at the same time. But he loved handing it out to people and watching their reactions, and he'd kind of laugh at you and go, yeah, baby. And that was this big line. And it kind of became our catchphrase. And Bill O'Brien, my fellow animator, got really good at imitating him. So when the time came to put together the Where's Dildo mini game, they needed sounds, and they're like, let's have Bill do his yeah baby for that. And that's how yeah baby became permanently connected to Where's Dildo and Larry 7.
And who animated Where's Dildo?
It might have been me. I definitely remember being the one to hide him around the game. I don't know. Jason Peele came up with a character. I might have animated him, or at least I might have been the one who sent him out to be animated by a outsourced studio. I can't remember, Daniel.
It's something that you should remember. I mean, this is like a significant part of the game.
Yeah.
Even if you added it at the last minute. When I talked to Allo, he told me that it was added late in production.
Kind of, yeah. Yeah, Jason. I remember Jason Peele came up with it. I hid him around the game. I may have animated it. I'll take credit for it as long as nobody gets offended at me.
Take credit for it. In the meantime, if I'll talk to other Sierra guys who will eventually take credit for it, then
we'll start a big war.
Yeah.
Who's going to take credit for Dildo?
Now, you mentioned in the past that during your time at Sierra, you particularly enjoyed Saturday nights at the Pines, where you fraternized with drunk rednecks. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I mean, it was a small town. There was hardly anything else to do on Saturday nights. Usually I'd go up there with Oliver Brailsford, who I mentioned in a chat the other day. He used to play live action Crazy Taxi with his car. The Pines was like a little roadhouse. They would have music, usually country music, line dancing, things like that. Generally, good-natured crowd. And some Saturday nights I'd go up there along with many other people from Sierra. And, we were known. We were kind of like, oh, yeah, don't you work at Sierra? We're kind of one of the big employers in the area, so we're helping keep the area alive. Other than that, there's not much to tell. Just, a bunch of, there's no real debauchery or anything like that, but, just funny instances of people watching, I suppose.
Now, you mentioned in the past that there was a batch file that probably came from QA that played a bunch of King's Quest audio in a certain order so that it sounded dirty out of context.
Oh, yeah.
What was that all about?
I wish I had a copy of that thing. It was funny as hell. It was, I don't know who put it together, but it must have been one of these cases where people put aside a bunch of audio files that they thought were funny out of context and then played them in a certain order.
From which King's Quest?
It kind of went 7. I want to say 7 because that was the one that was being worked on at the time. Don't ask me for any quotes from there. I don't remember, but I just remember they were super. It was just really funny. And then along the same lines, there was something similar, except there was an audio file of the Flintstones that made its way around the office. That was the same concept.
Gotcha. A safe work environment.
Yeah.
Now, in 1997, you were credited as an additional artist on The Realm. Now, when we talked about Torin's Passage, you said that back in 1995, you worked on The Realm. So what took this game so long to be released? Were there any production delays or?
It was pretty much one of the earliest massively multiplayer online games. So a lot of and plus it was the days of the 56K dial-up modem. So, a lot of the technology to get the game to work just was either in its infancy or still needed to be developed, although it was obviously thought of as possible by then. And just in terms of how to implement it, the Realm was ahead of its time. Perhaps so much so that it was almost not worth making until, I don't mean that to sound negative in any way, but you think about how we had to organize all the artwork. We'd have to, first of all, draw a character, going through all the motions, the walking, the fighting, and whatever else it would need to do. But then we'd have to have a decent amount of, and it had to be like a paper doll type character, essentially naked or in its underwear, and then you'd have to have a decent amount of clothing to put on them, pants and shirts and however else you wanted to break it up. And then for every one of those items, every one of those articles of clothing, you had to animate that article of clothing to match the animation on the character. So it would get exponentially more complicated the more detail you wanted to put in. It just, you couple that with experimenting with how you want the characters to look. And just, there's all kinds of debate on the best approach as far as that. Like I always contended that it would be neat to have it look more like a medieval woodcut sort of game. And had I pursued that idea, I'm sure I would have thought of suggesting like some kind of segmented animation like you have today, where like almost like flash animation where you can bend characters' limbs and things to make them move or to generate the animation. But I don't really think there was much of a way back then to do that. But it would have definitely streamlined some of the process we had to have, we had to do for the Realm, all things considered.
So you worked on it in 1995, and then you moved on to other projects, and then you went back working on it in early 1997 or in 1996.
No, the year was, I think it was released in 96 or 97.
It was released in 97.
It was finally released, yeah, because it had a super long development time. And so I guess I'd been grandfathered into the credits from working on it way back.
Gotcha. Okay. Moving on to 1998. In March 1998, the discovery of the massive accounting fraud at CUC was made public. Yeah.
I know. Wow.
It comes as a surprise to you, but that's the truth. Massive accounting fraud at CUC. What do you have to say for yourself, Al? How did you find out about it?
I found out about it same as everyone else, coming into work one day and everyone's up in arms. Did you hear about what happened? And, so on and so forth from there. Yeah, it was a crazy day. I had stock options. I had no idea at the time. I was young and new to things. I didn't really know how to exercise my stock options and trade them in for any sort of money. I was just aware that whatever they were worth, they're worth a hell of a lot less today because somebody was cooking the books. And all that, if I remember, it was CUC bought Sierra, and then shortly thereafter, they merged with HFS, which was another similar kind of conglomerate that did all, they kind of handled all kinds of unrelated properties and businesses. And they figured, kind of like the opposite of them buying Sierra. They figured, hey, whereas like Sierra was like, you're different enough from anything we're into, so we're going to buy you to diversify. CUC and HFS said, hey, we're similar enough that we should join forces and combine our assets. And so they did that, and the whole Senate debacle came about because the accountants on HFS's side wanted to get a better look at CUC's accounting. And from my understanding, the CUC side resisted and came up with all kinds of excuses and delaying tactics until finally they kind of sheepishly gave him the ledgers and said, okay, here you go. And then all of a sudden, the HFS side had questions. And, when it became evident what was going on, the lawsuits flew, people went to jail. And that was over the course of several years, actually.
Well, luckily, there was the Enron accounting fraud 2 years later that was even bigger. And so nobody talks about the CUC accounting fraud anymore, unless you're talking about the Sierra early days. Other than that.
Yeah, boy, I had a flashback one time. I was back east visiting family at Christmas time. And one of my relatives had an errand to run up in some area I wasn't familiar with. And we're driving along and talking, and I look, and we're passing Sendent headquarters. Like probably about a year after the whole thing fell apart. And the the headquarters is there. The sign is still up. I don't know if anyone's in the building, or there probably wasn't on that day, but because it was right around Christmas at night. But I don't know if anyone was still working there or, wrapping things up to shut down the business or whatever. But it kind of caught me off guard because I hadn't thought about it in a while. Yet suddenly here it is. I'm, facing the building here where that, was involved in some of my woes.
Now, still in 1998, you were credited for animation on Leisure Suit Larry's Casino,
Oh, yeah.
which was quite non-conventional project because, as far as I know, it wasn't originally intended to be a Leisure Suit Larry game and only underwent a rebranding of sorts during later stages of production. What can you tell me about this project?
Well, the Hoyle series, the Sierra did the Hoyle series of card games and board games. That was the Larry's Casino was all related to that, because they could basically phone in the Hoyle games. It was just kind of reskinning the same game over. I mean, I shouldn't be that blasé about it. I know there were changes here and there to the AI and things, but essentially it was their best-selling. I don't know if it was the best-selling, but it's certainly most dependable series of games. They could very accurately predict how much each one was going to sell. And so that was actually when Al was trying to solidify plans for Larry 8. And the new management didn't seem to be too interested in it. But they were, I suppose, undecided at the time. And they said, Al, why don't you... they came up with the idea, why don't you design a Larry Casino game, and we could just like reskin a Hoyle game, and that way we can maybe earn a little bit more than the sales of a Hoyle game, because we know that Hoyle games sell, but we also know that there's a whole set of Leisure Suit Larry fans out there who might not be buying Hoyle games. And so it kind of struck a lot of people as a good idea, Al included, I assume. And we forged ahead with that. And boy, I'm trying to think. When I got on that game, I got on at the beginning, but they were actually outsourcing the animation to some new hire in Oakhurst. There's the team.
Here's the team.
And he and I started basically collaborating through chat and email. Okay, you handle this character, I'll handle this character. Hey, wouldn't it be funny if... Did you do that? Wouldn't it be funny if this character did this? Did you animate a character doing this yet? No? Okay, fine, I'll do it. Keep in mind that I did it so you could do something else on another person. And we kind of went on with that until eventually I kind of gradually took over, or we kind of finished up the Avatar animations. And so I kind of took over the rest of it. And, we were talking about cameos earlier. I put an Outlook cameo in there, as well as a Bill Gates cameo. The big thing with Bill Gates at the time was that somebody hit him in the face with a pie at some conference. Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm.
So, so I'd have him, I did a thing where you can place a little Bill Gates sprite in the middle of a room, and then call up a random sequence of events where pies can fall at him from, 4 or 5 directions. One of them was, you see your typical cartoon saw coming up from the floor in front of him, sawing a circle, sawing a hole into the floor, and then a pie flies out of the hole, smacks him under the nose. And Al, I just had walking around the casino in a barrel, looking forlorn.
So you're in charge of making the animations in Leisure Suit Larry Casino consistent with the look and feel of Leisure Suit Larry 7?
I mean, it wasn't that formal. It was just, here's a game. It needs animation. We need to liven up the backgrounds. Otherwise, there's going to be nothing. Just sound effects. Just ambient sound. Throw in some funny stuff, but keep in mind that we're cranking this out. We have to be fast about this. So I animated it a lot more simply and in a lot more limited way than I otherwise would have. And I'm I'm not even sure I ever got to see everything I ever did for that game in its final state. Because you spoke to
that's
Al.
an idea for a live stream.
Yeah. Can that game? Well, here's the thing. Can that game even be played though? Because my
I'm not sure.
understanding,
Maybe the single player mode, and
maybe,
even that, I'm not
maybe,
certain.
but I think I don't know. It's possible that in single player mode you miss out on a lot of the stuff just because of how it was set up.
True. Now, at the same time, there was a 3D test video made for Leisure Suit Larry 8. Do you remember that one?
I remember being shown it by Jason Zayas. Yes, he did that.
Test. Is this on? Hello?
He's not even wearing his leisure suit.
Yeah. So I can't speak for Jason, but my guess would be that at the time, you had the Voodoo graphics cards coming out. 3D was becoming basically the entire game industry.
Mm-hmm.
2D games were falling. 2D games were quickly falling by the wayside, at least in the U.S. And so that's all management wanted to hear about was 3D. You want to propose a game, fine, but make sure you tell us it's in 3D. And so I guess in the process of coming up with proposals for Larry 8, Al and Jason got together and put this together just to show that yes, we can do it. As you can see, the only caveat being you might have to adjust your expectations for a schedule. Because it used to be we had game production down to 9 months. 9 months of production, about 40 to 50 rooms in a game. No problem. That's about what's manageable. But then, they're already trying to convince us to do Larry 7 in 3D in 9 months.
Really?
And we're going, no. First of all, none of us know 3D yet. I'm sure we're going to learn it. But, it's going to take a lot of coming up to speed. You're either going to have to adjust the schedule or plan for another 2D game. And they kind of fought back and forth with us for a while about it. And we're like, no, and we're like, look, we're not even demanding a longer than 9 month schedule. We're telling you it's just not going to be possible for what you're thinking. And they finally, I guess figured out, okay, well, I guess they know what they're talking about. Just let them make a 2D game. But yeah, I guess they had King's Quest VIII or the Mask of Eternity in production, as well as the beginnings of Gabriel Knight 3.
Mm-hmm.
So I speculate, I don't know for sure, but I speculate that they maybe wanted to see how those games performed before committing to Larry.
Now, speaking of King's Quest Mask of Eternity,
Yeah.
in 1998, you were credited for additional help in King's Quest VIII. Now, soon after Leisure Suit Larry 7 production wrapped in 1996, you were interviewed. And in that interview, you said that it's hard to give 3D characters character since you're limited to how much information you can put into the computer, and that translates into how far you can bend the knee. Now, I couldn't agree more, especially when it comes to late 90s 3D, which is why I'm interested in hearing what your initial reaction was to the decision to go full 3D in King's Quest VIII.
I thought it was a sign of the times. I had no idea what they were going to, or how they were going to approach it. or how Roberta was thinking of approaching it. I mean, the most basic thing and the most basic way to, or expectation to have, would be that it would be just like the adventure games that they've always put out, except with 3D graphics. I mean, I'm trying to think, had I seen Resident Evil by then? Because Resident Evil, I remember thinking back when it was first out, that that's kind of the look I would picture for a 3D adventure game. Just, different camera angles and things like that. Maybe more than one view of a room, because you can have different camera angles. But I don't think it was available yet back then. Or now it could have been. I think it was. But anyway, yeah, so I figured it was either going to be something like that, or because of Doom and Quake, you kind of have more of a first person or third person real time view in the game. And I could see how either one would, conceivably be possible, but I had no idea what anyone was expecting it to be. That makes sense.
It seems like they forced Roberta to do it in 3D as well. It didn't seem like, at least from what I've heard from her interviews at the time and from my conversations with her, that she didn't want it to be 3D, but they told her that that's the way to go, especially for a game that was supposed to ship in 1998.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, that's definitely that definitely sounds like their attitude at the time. But Ken and Roberta, as you know, they always pushed innovation. So I don't know how opposed to that idea she necessarily was. It might have been a case of maybe she felt that, the 3D games, like, poly counts and things like that, weren't quite up to snuff yet for the quality of game she wanted to make. Which would have been a
Sierra did push
point.
for innovation, for example, with their support for the Roland MT32 sound card and the fact that they sold games with the sound card so that people will be able to listen to the high quality sound that they try to get people to get from their games. But in my opinion, 3D started looking like something that's worth looking at in the early 2000s, if that. And in the late 90s, it was, I don't know, it seems like every game looks like a prototype of sorts and not like an actual game. I mean, I understand that Tomb Raider was groundbreaking, but still, they released a game in which you had cutscenes that the characters were talking to each other, but their lips weren't moving when they were talking because they couldn't change the textures of the face during the talking. And so,
yeah, like car games and games with mechs always look best because they're naturally angular. Anyway,
Pixar, for example, knew the limitations of 3D. So when they made Toy Story, it was because computer graphics at the time looked glossy, just like a toy would. And so you could make toys, but they didn't have humans in their movies, or at least not too many humans. And when you'd see a human, you'd either see a part of that human or just for a short period of time. Only when they mastered that ability to create realistic humans, then they started adding them to their movies. But it seems like when it came to computer games, they just added humans way too early, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I mean, that was largely corporate decisions doing that because it's the hot new technology. You look at it, you see dollar signs. And, the creative people, we even tried proposing a combination of hand-drawn and 3D graphics where, you'd have 3D vehicles and, the characters in them would be 2D. And, you can go from there. You can go and, it's more story-based or more action-based, whatever. But they didn't want to hear it. They're like, no, just do one or the other. But you mentioned Full Throttle earlier. You see, they managed to do that fairly well. At least in a limited way, but still.
Yeah, but it wasn't real-time 3D. It
Right.
was pre-rendered.
Yeah.
So you could say that the 3D in The Seventh Guest looks better than, I don't know, any 3D game that came out, any real-time 3D game that came out in 1993 or 1994.
Yeah.
But in The Seventh Guest, it's pre-rendered. So you can't beat that.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, the people, at least at Sierra, the people running the company, especially after the CUC merger, wouldn't have thought along those lines at all. They just, 2D and 3D was as far as they got in the thinking. And it's either one or the other. There's no possibility to mix them. There's no differentiating between pre-rendered or real time. Yeah.
I mean, well, LucasArts made the switch to 3D with their adventure games after The Curse of Monkey Island, then they switched to 3D for Grim Fandango. Then the reasoning behind it was the fact that at the time, the resolution of the 2D games was so high that you had to spend a lot of money and a lot of time to make 2D animations and 2D cutscenes at that resolution. And so it seemed like 3D would eventually be cheaper than a 2D game of the same resolution and scope.
Yeah.
So that was the reasoning, at least at LucasArts.
Yeah, it's legitimate reasoning for sure. And very true in many cases.
Now, as far as I know, the art development for King's Quest VIII began immediately after Torin's passage in 1995 and consisted mostly of people from the Torin's Passage team. How many stayed all the way through to the end of the production?
It's hard for me to say. As I remember it, yeah, I mean, we finished Torin's, and then we actually went on to Larry after Torin. So I think King's Quest, I think Mask of Eternity was being developed early on, parallel to Larry 7. But when, gosh, I don't even know. I mean, there was a little bit of art development, but not much at all by the time we finished up Larry and started working on King's Quest VIII. Because I still remember there being a lot of concepting and just general coming up to speed on 3D and making a few rough early 3D models to test out in the game in the engine.
And you had a cameo in King's Quest VIII. Can you elaborate a bit on how you earned it?
Did I have a cameo? Oh, yeah. Was it in the cemetery? Yeah. I want to say it was 1998 or early 99. I decided to move on from Sierra. This was at the tail end of Larry's Casino. And they had a cemetery in the game, Mask of Eternity, of all the people who left the project, or not left the project, but left Sierra in the interim, specifically because they didn't want to work on Mask of Eternity, to which I will neither confirm nor deny was the case with me.
So Mask of Eternity was the last project you worked on at Sierra?
No, it was Larry's Casino. But there was talk of so Yeah, that's right. Mask of Eternity. The reason I ended up on Larry's Casino, and also another game before that was canceled, was I could talk about that actually. That's kind of an interesting story. But but the reason I ended up on Larry's Casino was that there was a little production hiatus called for I don't know, a certain percentage of the team on King's Quest. Because they realized that there was a lot of stuff they needed to iron out and finalize, and it just didn't make sense to have all these people forging ahead on the game while this stuff was undecided. And so that took, I'll say, a good 2 or 3 months to figure out. Or no, probably longer than that. Yeah, I'll say longer than that. But yeah, eventually they started ramping back up again. And, towards the end of Larry's Casino, I started hearing, "Hey, Al, how would you feel about going back on King's Quest VIII?" And
I quit.
Yeah, it wasn't quite like that. I'd already been looking around at other opportunities. So it wasn't quite that, but the problem was that the Ascendant thing had happened in the meantime. And right after that, things became very uncertain in the company. And even Roberta wasn't sure that her game wasn't going to get canceled. They were kind of canceling games willy-nilly for, no good reason other than they wanted to claim a tax credit. And so that's where the game before Larry's Casino that I worked on comes in. It was to be called Vampire Wars, and it was a real-time strategy game. And let me see, I can tell you a little bit about that. Don Munsell, who was co-designer on Larry 7, co-designed that game with Nathan Gams, who was an art director at Sierra for quite a while.
Mm-hmm.
They came up with a design. The premise was that there are 4 vampire clans at war with one another, and the whole thing took place in like some generic Eastern European country, and so you could go and take over villages, basically make people your thralls, and you had to do it subtly, or the villagers would come after you with torches and pitchforks. But it was, you had to kind of take over territory without getting discovered, while also battling your opponents who were trying to do the same. And each clan had their strengths and weaknesses. And it was very, like Warcraft 2 was the template of the day for strategy games. And so that was very much based on that same sort of design. Unfortunately, what happened was, in the process of buying Sierra, CUC had also bought Blizzard. And so we became sister companies. And, some people on our team at Sierra said, "Hey, we're working on this strategy game. We're sister companies with Blizzard. Maybe we should reach out to them and get some feedback." And bad move, because they didn't appreciate that. We're encroaching on their territory, and like none of us could have known at the time that they'd react this way necessarily, but we got a lot of negative feedback and no good. we were strongly discouraged from making the game. No real indication that it was overtly political, even though it kind of was. But yeah, the game got canceled. I don't know. I really don't know if anyone, from Blizzard spoke to anyone higher up in our ranks to encourage them to cancel it. But from what I understand, they had a day of milestone meetings at the office, And there was a bunch of games that were behind schedule, and management was super frustrated by the end of the day, and we were last to show our game. And somebody said, hey, wow, somebody realized that they had a bad day and maybe they need to be perked up a little bit to witness our game. And whatever they did had the opposite effect. And they kind of, I don't know if they felt offended or, I mean, I can't imagine what it was that happened, but they kind of felt that maybe they were having more smoke blown at them. And they canceled the game from there on, which was a shame.
How long did you work on the game before it was canceled?
Several months, probably a good 4 to 6 months. But that and other similar situations with games kind of had everybody on guard and keeping an eye out for other opportunities, because it felt like there was no guarantee that, your game was going to be in development from day to day. And even Roberta's game, the King's Quest VIII, was kind of undergoing some of that turbulence.
And so when exactly did you leave Sierra?
Oh boy.
The exact date.
Yeah, the exact date. No, it feels like I was there altogether almost 4 years. So probably the springtime, probably spring of 1998 or 99. I'm going to say 98, maybe summer of 98. I'll go with.
Yeah, because in summer of 1999, King's Quest VIII would have been out already.
Yeah.
Awesome. And what did you do afterwards?
Well, immediately after, I went to Cave Dog Entertainment, which was a subsidiary of Humongous Entertainment, which is Ron Gilbert and Shelley Day's kids game company. And they started Cave Dog as a subsidiary in order to make more mainstream games, which they did with Total Annihilation to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that was another. I worked on a game called Amen: The Awakening, and then that was canceled a couple of years later. That was going to be a first-person shooter. What can I say about that? It was, for me, it was interesting professionally because, I'd worked in 3D software, 3D Studio Max, first couple of iterations of that, was finally comfortable with it. And then after that, it was moving to this other company. It was the first time I had to shift away from a 3D software package that I had just gotten comfortable with. So I started working with Softimage, as it was known at the time. Came up to speed with that, fairly fast, I'd say, because I'd been using 3D Studio Max and, I kind of knew more of what to expect. It still would have changed a lot of stuff I did in hindsight, in terms of my work quality. Thinking about it now, I would have done certain things differently. But the game was canceled, and then it was, let me think. I'd say, I want to say 2010, 2012 or so, but I'm probably off. It was resurrected or rethought, reconcepted as a game called Consortium, pretty much by the two lead designers. And I had nothing to do with it, but Jason Zayas from Sierra of Leisure Suit Larry 7 and Larry 3D Test fame actually did the art for that. But that was kind of like an indie remote project for, I think, everyone involved.
And afterwards, you moved to Amaze Entertainment.
Yes, they had Yeah, I'll leave Humongous alone. There's certain aspects of it that I'd rather not speculate on. But essentially, they had a mass layoff. Like 18 people or so. I was caught up in that. Week and a half later, I started work at Amaze Entertainment, which was right up the street at the time. And that the interesting thing about that, so I got on board. They were starting production on this what was going to be a big game for the original Xbox, and they were hiring people. They were ramping up fast and strong for that game. But because of my 2D animation background, they had a couple of projects in the pipeline that they wanted me to help out with first. And those were a couple of educational games based on the Magic School Bus, if you're familiar with that property.
Mm-hmm.
So I was kind of like, I agreed. I got there, started working on Magic School Bus. And I was questioning myself, I'm going, was this the right move? It kind of feels like a step backwards because, I'm working on this educational stuff and I'm supposed to be moving on to this other project, but there's no telling how long that's going to take. I was like that for the first couple of weeks. And then suddenly it hit me that, I'm working on this, really popular property among kids, and I'm actually producing work for a change that's going to, educate or help educate kids. And it's definitely going to be part of some young childhoods. And suddenly, like, my whole outlook on it changed to the point where, I finished up a couple of those Magic School Bus projects and started working on what became Azuric Rise of Parathia for the Xbox, which, we can talk about that. I can give out my apologies for that. But but to the point where I started working on that, and I was asking and being asked to still help out on the Magic School Bus stuff, kind of behind the scenes. And I gladly did so.
And what part of these projects did you work on? You're credited as artist on them.
I animated the characters, basically. If you ever see them, they're basically like very simplified adventure games.
Mm-hmm.
And you usually get only a fraction of the screens, like, say, a typical Sierra adventure game would have. And it's mostly like, kids and other characters standing around. And you click on them and they talk, or they pick something up, or they just very simple little things. They're not like super intricate at all. But, you click on something whimsical happens. And so, I was kind of like concepting out and animating that stuff.
And in Azuric Rise of Parathia, you're credited for additional cinematic animation and dialogue.
Yeah. So I mostly did game animation on that. And I will say that nobody who worked on that game was putting their best foot forward, first of all. There were... I'm not sure what all was involved. There were conflicts between the lead designer and the producer and the lead programmer. There was like I remember some kind of little kerfuffle happening during a meeting that was obviously hinging on previous incidents. And it kind of caught me off guard because I had no idea. But basically, I was doing game animation with another person or two. But our team was relatively small at the time. And so we dove into some cinematic animation. For one or two of the cinematics, we had a general idea of what was supposed to happen, but not much concepted out. So I ended up helping with dialogue, helping write some of the dialogue, and it was very very much purple prose, if I remember correctly. I kind of remember hearing it later on and going, ooh, cringe. Why did I write it that way? But, is it my fault for writing it that way as an animator, or is it my fault for, the designer accepting it, knowing that I wasn't officially a writer?
It's not your fault.
Yeah.
And after you worked at Amaze Entertainment, you worked at iBase Games.
iBase. Okay, so iBase was, that's another one I better watch what I say about. No, iBase was actually post Sierra. It was Al Lowe's company that he formed with another guy named Ken, not the same Ken. And he had an idea for a game called Sam Swade, which would have been like a detective farce. And I was there from day one to
Day 2.
day 0, 2 years later to Doomsday. I was actually there the day before day 1 when we kind of went in early to set up the office. And that was with also Jason Zayas of Sierra. And let's see, what can I tell you about iBase? I mean, basically it was, Al had this game idea. Ken was a fan, and he was able to rustle up some funding. And so they rented an office literally the next block over from where Sierra had been. Actually, almost right in between the two buildings Sierra had been in was our office, and we worked on it, and circumstances early on started seeming to be a little, I don't know, a little precarious, but we forged ahead until we couldn't forge ahead anymore, basically. But it took all of 2 years. We got so far as building a prototype and a website, and showing off the prototype to other potential investors. And then apparently Al and Ken couldn't, they're game people, but they were heavily focused on being business people at the time. And so they apparently had problems describing the game. They showed the game, but they had problems drawing parallels to what else is on the market that's comparable to this. Because it was unique, but there were a couple things they could have mentioned. There were a couple other games they could have compared it to that they didn't think of comparing it to. Psychonauts, I think, was one thing they did mention, but because Psychonauts didn't do so well, it didn't seem to encourage anybody towards, a positive vibe about our game. But, it sucks because in hindsight, we probably should have done it for the Wii and had it be a lot less ambitious, and it could have still made money.
It doesn't sound like it had a business problem. It was more like a marketing problem.
Yeah. Communications, maybe. I wasn't privy to any of their investor meetings, so it was hard to say.
And eventually Psychonauts did become successful. So
yeah, but at the time it wasn't like universally, held in high regard, I suppose. I certainly liked it, for the record. I played it at the time. But I would say in hindsight, I would have suggested comparing it to something like Uncharted, which, we would have probably not been anywhere near that quality, but it was to be a partially open world game. Linear aspects to it, but definitely open for exploration. And the more you do, the more the story develops, the more parts of the world open up to you, was our thought. It was going to have just all sorts of game mechanics. We really should have probably restricted those a little more. But, running, jumping, climbing, interrogating people, things like that, with a now low flavor to it.
Sounds like LA Noir.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, that's a good one. One of my suggestions, he was like, all right, so I have this character. He's got to be interrogated. How do I make that interesting, and action based? I'm like, well, you want Allo humor, right? He's like, yeah, if it can be done. I said, have the guy the main character, Sam Swade, catch up to the guy right as he's got to get to the bathroom, or he's about to, go in his pants or something. And he really has to get to the bathroom, but you have to talk to him. And he's like, well, you can ask me what you want to ask me, but I'm headed that way. You keep up if you have to. And so you have to chase the guy and run through maybe some kind of essentially an obstacle course and remain close enough to him to hear what he's saying. So there's a free game design idea for anyone who'd want to adapt it.
And after iBase Games, you moved to Faza Studio.
Oh, Faza. That's that was a studio in Chicago that got purchased by Microsoft, and so they were out here in Redmond by then. Yeah, I really wasn't there. I was there about a month, literally. I was scripting. I was scripting animation transitions for a month, mostly coming up to speed with the tool.
And then Microsoft bought the company?
No. Microsoft. This was at Microsoft. But they had bought FASA, and it was a Microsoft brand by then.
Gotcha.
And then they eventually, years later, they closed it. But yeah, that was a Shadowrun game. I really had next to nothing to do with it. Because my next company, I'm sure you saw me credited at, was Gas Powered Games, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'd applied to both companies around the same time, and started working at Microsoft. And then they called me back from Gas Powered, and they really aggressively pursued me, which was, it was a mistake for me to ultimately agree to go there for a couple of reasons. But I ended up there, and it was pretty much the highest I've ever been paid, as well as the most miserable I've ever been at a job.
Jeez, what happened over there?
Wow, probably the less said, the better. Let's put it this way. While I was getting offered the job, I knew a lot of people. I mean, the industry around here was pretty small back then, certainly a lot smaller than it is now, or in some ways, because it's kind of condensed over here into like a few companies. But it seems like there's more of a mix of veterans and new people at this point. But, back then it seemed like a smaller world in the local industry. And, I told people, oh yeah, Gas Powered is pursuing me. They want me to come in for an interview. They, probably want me to work for them. And they're like, oh, don't do it, dude. Don't do it, And, there's all kinds of reasons for it. And eventually I accepted. And then they said, okay, well, fine. You accepted. There's nothing you can do about it now. But, we strongly recommend you keep looking for work because that company just was not well regarded in the area. And it was basically, office politics that, they're probably one of the most political game developers in the area, where everyone's kind of tripping over each other to, make themselves look good. Well, by making other people look bad. And, people knew that wouldn't be the kind of environment I'd thrive in. And so, yeah, I was there for probably 6 to 8 months. And I finally said, it actually ended up being kind of a mutual thing. And I was able to get a little bit of a severance package out of it. Yeah.
And after Gas Powered Games, you worked at Wild Tangent.
Yeah, I mean, that was a couple of weeks. That was like a couple of weeks contract. I don't even remember the game, to be honest. But they were like casual games, almost kids games, but more like casual arcadey style games. I had a friend of mine working there who needed help getting some stuff done, so she recommended me.
And after that, you worked at Microsoft Game Studios. Again, you've come full circle after you worked at Faza Studio, which was acquired by Microsoft. So now you got a second run at Microsoft.
Yeah, Microsoft is interesting because I had these 2 runs at Microsoft. All right, going back the first time to where I was there only a month.
Mm-hmm.
I talked to my producer, and I thought I made it clear, hey, so I have this other company pursuing me for work for a full-time position. I'm over here on, I think it was like a 3-month contract or something like that. It was a very short-term contract. And I said, I realized it just started. And, I realized the professional thing to do is to fulfill my contract. So I wanted to talk to you first. I wanted to gauge how much you guys truly need me, because I'm still coming up to speed on the tools, I feel like. But, if it's going to be a deal breaker for me in the future, then I'm not going to accept this job, And he's like, oh, no, dude, accept it. Do what you have to do. It's okay. We'll find someone else. There was some delay at the time anyway, so the game likely wasn't going to release exactly when they expected anyway. He's like, no, dude, take care of yourself. Just, do what you got to do. So, okay, I accepted the job, I don't know if the guy was like saying all that to try to get rid of me for whatever reason. But, I went ahead, I followed his advice. I got this other gig at Microsoft later on, stayed for my full contract. Then at some point later on, a year or 2 later, found like another job at Microsoft I wanted to applied for that one, and got feedback saying that, yes, I'm a good candidate. I'm a great candidate for the position. However, they don't want to hire me because I skipped out on a Microsoft contract years before. And I'm like, what? I'm like, but I worked on a full contract in the meantime. And so this was being done through an agency, a local employment agency. And so Microsoft is their bread and butter. They didn't want to like debate it with them. Just, turn in the next candidate and see what happens.
So Microsoft held a grudge?
Apparently somebody at Microsoft did. Even though there was no apparent grudge when I left. And even though I, worked there for a year. But yeah, actually, I mean, but the year I worked there was pretty fun. I, again, casual games, worked on a variation of Uno and a poker game for Xbox Live. Do you remember I'm sure you do, the Xbox avatars?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was like a couple of the few games that used those. And that poker game was actually pretty semi-involved, I would say, pretty intricate animation-wise, because we would have, 10 or 12 people around a poker table, and they all had to be differentiated by how they're moving. And so we had to come up with at least 10 to 15 different animations of pretty much the same thing, but in different versions, sitting a different way, reacting to certain things a different way. It was plenty of work. It was actually pretty involved, more so than you would think. But if you look up Full House Poker on YouTube, you'll see exactly what I mean.
Now, one other thing you did at Microsoft was you created and maintained a master animation list in Excel.
Yes, I did.
What
That goes
was
without saying, but it looks impressive on resumes.
What did that master animation list consist of?
Just all the required animations for the avatars. In the case of the Microsoft, I mean, it's a pretty standard thing at on every project. Yeah, and you
Gotcha.
you add or subtract from it as needed. Mark off what's done. You leave space for notes so that you can annotate. Oh, we need to change this for whatever reason, or this is approved. Don't touch it anymore. And that kind of thing.
Well, I thought that given the fact that it was a position at Microsoft, that they force you to do something with Excel and mention it.
No.
It's like the name. When you talk about Microsoft, you have to name drop Excel at least once per conversation.
Yeah. Oh, and I should probably be mentioned that my art lead on those projects recently passed away. So my deepest sympathies to the family of Stephen Perringer. He was a good guy.
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah. So was I.
You worked with him throughout your stint at Microsoft at the time?
Yes.
Now, after the second Microsoft, you moved to Google, where you worked as a visual data specialist, and you worked on Google Maps.
Yeah, that was just a short term. It's just a short term project. I was literally a worker ant in a pool of 300 or 400 people. That was that was a case where the game industry is the way it is now, and I needed something to do to pay the bills. And so, hey, Google's hiring. Let me see what they need. And it was basically adjusting road data on Google Maps. They were upgrading and maintaining it at the time.
And Google didn't have any, game prototypes that you could work on, or
no, not that. No, then this was in Kirkland, Washington, so it wasn't their main campus by any means.
Gotcha, because they have sometimes the Google Doodles that have games or interactive elements, so that could have been.
Yeah, and this was the time when my life started getting really fun with health issues, like significant health issues, and my marriage breaking up, and all kinds of adventures. So yeah.
And so afterwards, you moved to Turnstile Studios in Seattle as an animator.
Yeah, I was helping Jason Zayas out for a little while. Again, a matter of a couple of weeks.
And then you became an instructor at the 3D Training Academy.
Yeah, that was probably a couple months. Everything kind of became piecemeal at that point. Really, let me think. I'll save you some time. Yeah, I mean, I just at that point started kind of doing odd jobs because, like I said, things started getting a little wonky for me in my personal life. I was involved in a couple little minor independent projects. I reconnected with Chris Willis, who was artist at Sierra, Space Quest VI, in fact.
Mm-hmm.
He called me up one day, and I was surprised to hear from him because I hadn't talked to him in years. But he'd gotten my number somehow. And he said, hey, Neil Matz and I are putting together a little game. We're trying to get a little indie company off the ground. And, would you be willing and or able to, help out with art and animation? I said, sure. I'm, on the caveat that they couldn't pay me. And I'm like, you know what? It's all portfolio building at this point. So sure, So we actually completed a game called Zombie Heat after a year or so. Neil dropped out. He figured that he didn't really have the time needed to devote to this. Chris and I invested some money in finishing it. And ultimately, he was working at some gaming company in Las Vegas that has since gone out of business, actually. But their thing was making kind of combining gambling machines and video games.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like you're playing a game of chance, similar to a slot machine, but there's actual arcade gameplay at work. And he showed somebody Zombie Heat, and they purchased it, and they had some prototype machines built, but I don't know if it was ever officially released for sale, because it seems like they kind of went out of business pretty fast after that. But Chris owns the rights at the moment. I think they reverted to him after they went out of business. Oh, but initially, I should say, before they purchased the game, we actually had it released briefly on the Apple Store, and it got a pretty decent reaction. It was kind of a variation on Angry Birds, but there was a little more to it than that. It wasn't as physics based, but there were it was strategic in a somewhat different way. But it was fun. I wish I had a copy to play.
Now, in 2018, you're credited as a 3D animator, cinematics artist, and concept artist on Hero U: Road to Redemption. What can you tell me about your contributions to this project and the Kickstarters behind it?
Oh, so okay. Well, that also started with Chris Willis. He had been working with Lori and Corey Cole on Hero U for a little while. And I believe he was making like levels, basically, or pieces of levels for construction into levels. But he was kind of keeping me appraised of what he was doing on that. And he said, "Oh, here's a YouTube video they posted. You could check it out and see what the game looks like." And I saw it and I said, "Holy cow. Can you put me in touch with Lori and Corey?" Because it harkened back to King's Quest VII and outsourced animation. The character models were fine, aside from a couple of little things, minor nitpicks. But the animation was, kind of, I mean, they kind of got what they paid for, but, I would be willing to, provide them with a lot more, is what I explained to Chris. And so he put me in touch with them, and I called them, and they agreed, "Hey, show us what you got." So, I took one of their animations, I think, and I said, here's how I think it, could have been done differently. And they liked what they saw. And so from then on, I kind of worked my way up to full-time contractor. And that was kind of a long production process, because I guess they'd already been at it for a couple of years by then. And it took them several more years to finalize the design and the game. But it was I loved it. It was a total passion project, I think, for everyone involved.
And so it wasn't just to fix the original animations. You recreated everything from scratch.
No. No, I mean, I recreated a lot of it probably from scratch, but I didn't touch everything. And there was still a lot that hadn't been done that was needed. So it's kind of, it was kind of perfect timing I guess, in that I was able to significantly affect the look of the game, and at the same time kind of steer it away from what I thought was kind of like a wrong trajectory. And then the beauty of that game is that, we were such a small team, and there were like several people on it that couldn't be as committed to it for various reasons. And so they would kind of come and go. And so I ended up having to wear multiple hats and do like particle effects and lighting, level lighting, and a couple other things that I hadn't done before, that I didn't even, when I first got on board the project, I didn't even conceive that I'd get the opportunity to do that. But it was interesting, I definitely enjoyed it. And I stuck around for their next two visual novel projects until they, pretty much fulfilled what they needed out of me, which was, in the other two projects, was mostly character concepts and putting together. Actually, I did a lot of Kickstarter fulfillment stuff from drawing.
Like what?
From backer portraits and putting together an end credit sequence using the backer portraits. So like video editing, and then I actually shipped out some of the rewards, just because it was one of these loose things that, was kind of hanging around over everyone's head that, Lori and Corey needed to get done. And I said, you know what? Ship me the stuff. I'll get it out there. And I did that, probably not as promptly as I should have. I hope they forgive me for that. But as far as I know, I didn't burn any bridges.
Now, we've gone over several of your roles in the early 2010s and late 2010s. And so during that time, you also released 2 books.
Oh, yes.
What can you tell me about these books?
So that was a little side gig. I've always been a fan of, like history, but also like local folklore. And shortly after I moved out west, I learned about a magazine. It was basically a zine. It was early 90s. I don't know how familiar you are with the zine scene, where everybody was kind of self-publishing little booklets of their own interests. And, they would every once in a while convince a store to carry them, or they would get on mailing lists and trade them with different people. And so a guy out in New Jersey, Mark Skirman, came up with one called Weird New Jersey. And Weird New Jersey was focused on cataloging sort of like local folklore and just offbeat local history, which are, as I said, 2 things that have always interested me. I've always like been into like interesting stories and just, how certain things came about, and, rumors behind this or that. And so he came up with a zine about this stuff, and I got wind of it probably online somehow. And I was kind of blown away that somebody's going through the trouble of doing this. And I contacted them and I said, hey, here's a couple of things I know about. And by the way, I'm a professional artist. If you guys ever have need for illustrations, let me know, And he said, hey, absolutely. In fact, here's something. We have this article. What can you do with this? And that kind of began like a years-long working relationship. And so I was kind of like freelancing for them every once in a while. Couple articles here, some mostly illustrations, spot illustrations for their magazine. And it kind of like their magazine snowballed in popularity. And it was eventually, who was it? It was, well, they would sell them on consignment at Barnes & Noble stores, Barnes & Noble bookstores. And somebody at Barnes & Noble realized that overall, they were selling, and they only came out twice a year. But by some measurement, they were selling more than Time magazine, which is quite a big deal. And they said, wow, you know what? This needs to be turned into a book. What if we made a book series for, instead of just New Jersey, do it for every state in the United States and, see how popular we can get some of these books to be in their respective areas. And so they worked out a deal. They did that. And they started contracting local authors. And, I got a few of their books. I thought it was, pretty neat. And in talking to them one day, I said, yeah, keep me in mind for Weird Washington. And I meant as far as illustrations, And they said, funny you should mention that because we're going to ask you to co-author it with another guy we're talking to. And I said, really? Okay. And so Jeff Davis was my writing partner, and he's he's a local guy who's written several books about like local ghost stories and local history as well. But he's really into the ghost stories aspect of this. He's been on some TV shows, like numerous TV shows about, hauntings and things. And so they tapped him as well to write this book. And so, yeah, we teamed up. We're a pretty good team. He did the bulk of the first book just because of my schedule at the time. Didn't allow for it. Then we did Weird Oregon a couple of years later, and that was more split up 50-50. But yeah, I'm pretty proud of them. I would love to do a sequel, but the book series ended for various reasons. It looks like anything I'd want to do along those lines would have to be self-published at this point.
Or maybe you could launch a Kickstarter.
Maybe that's a consideration. It's been years. I guess I'd have to gauge interest in it at this point before committing to something like that. But maybe people can let me know.
Now, before we conclude our conversation, I have a few questions from our viewers and some
sure.
of your former colleagues.
Okay.
Karen Nestor asks, have you been to Jersey lately or found any good pizza in the Pacific Northwest?
Yes, I was in Jersey last year. I believe, oh God, what time of year was it? Might have been like early spring. Pizza. I'm very serious about pizza. There's a place out here called Brooklyn Brothers Pizza, and that's up in Everett, north of Seattle. That is very accurate to East Coast pizza. And I also found out about one closer to me, because that's about an hour north of me. There's supposed to be one a bit closer to me that I haven't gone to yet, but it's definitely on my to-do list.
Steve Conrad asks, what would you tell your 20-year-old self?
What would I tell my 20-year-old self? Don't get into game development. or not really don't get into game development. There was a point in my life where I could have very easily gone into the programmer end of things, into the programmer end of game development. The art, I'm a very visual person, so I kind of gravitated towards that. But I might have told my 20-year-old self, hey, listen, don't sell yourself short, because you can always learn to draw easier than you can learn to program, go learn how to be a programmer, because in the long run, financially, you're going to end up better rewarded for it. And then, if you learn art, then you'll be doubly as useful to the industry. And your chances of, working on cool stuff are going to improve.
Anna from the Classic Gamers Guild podcast asks, as the co-author of Weird Washington and Weird Oregon, how have these experiences in exploring local legends and secrets influenced your approach to game design and storytelling, particularly in the context of adventure or narrative-driven games?
Well, I've definitely had... I could say I've dropped the ball, but I haven't really, because I barely started. But I've definitely had for years an idea for an adventure game. It can go either way. It could be an action game or an adventure game based on local legends. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. You just apply cryptids and things to a game. But, you kind of build a story around it. So I've had kind of a concept that's semi-comparable to Ghostbusters, I would say, but not exactly. But it's definitely inspirational, like as far as like dreaming up characters and even situations. You can definitely interrelate a lot of the concepts.
And Anna also asks, do you think you would ever make a trivia game based on weird places, or maybe an edutainment game?
A trivia game?
Yeah.
I would love to. Let's arrange the funding. Pretty much. Yeah, I am currently casually, not very, well, we're keeping it professional. We're trying to keep it professional, but I'm currently working on a little indie game with a few people. We have a partial prototype so far, but nothing worth showing or ready to be shown quite yet. But we're hoping to announce it soon. I don't know that it would necessarily be related to, just the weird, the weird aspect of my interests of, just folklore and things like that. But, who knows? There are various tropes involved in the story, for sure. But we'll see where it goes.
Sounds awesome. Do you have a playable demo?
Like I said, nothing worth showing yet. There's nothing approaching a demo. We're trying to kind of fast track that at the moment.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And one last question from me. What are your plans for 2024, and how can people stay in touch with you and your work?
Well, you can... I have a very outdated website, eufrasio.com, and you can go in there and fill out a form to email me, or you can look me up on Facebook and send me a random message. I usually reply to them. 2024, I don't know, man. I've been playing it by ear for many years, it feels like, and it seems like I'm still kind of in that realm. Hopefully things get a little more solidified for me, and I can give you a more definitive answer next time.
Sounds awesome. Well, Al, it's been real fun talking to you today, and I hope that in the near future you'll also be able to join me for a live stream in which we'll play one of the games you've worked on, maybe from your Sierra days, or if we'll have something more recent, then I'd love to play it with you on stream.
Yeah, that'd be great. I don't know if that poker game is still available to play. That'd be a fun one. But
We'll need to see if any of the multiple emulators available online will be able to run it. And if so,
I'm down.
thank you, Al.